My family disowned me when I married a black man they said was not one of us. For 8 years, I did not receive a single phone call, birthday card, or holiday greeting from the people who raised me. Then my husband's cybersecurity company went public, pushing our net worth to $53 million. Out of nowhere, my mother showed up at my front door with a thick manila folder and a list of financial demands. My reply to her sheer audacity made her regret she ever found my address. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace and your sanity. My name is Courtney, and I am 33 years old. I work as a data architect, a career that requires precision logic and an understanding of how complex systems connect. Unfortunately, the system of my own family was broken beyond repair. My husband Donovan and I built a beautiful, peaceful life together in a gated suburban community entirely without the help or blessing of my parents. For exactly 8 years, 3 months, and 12 days, my mother and father acted as if I had ceased to exist. Their silence was absolute and suffocating at first, but eventually it became the foundation of my peace. That hard-won peace was shattered on a rainy Tuesday morning, a day that started like any other routine workday, but quickly escalated into a psychological battleground. The morning was draped in the kind of heavy, relentless rain that makes you want to stay inside forever. I was standing in my spacious, custom-built kitchen pouring my second cup of coffee. Donovan was upstairs in his home office already on a video call with his board of directors. Our 5-year-old son Leo was still sound asleep in his room. The house was quiet, filled only with the comforting hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic drumming of rain against our floor-to-ceiling windows. I took a deep breath, savoring the warmth of the mug in my hands, feeling profoundly grateful for the safety and security Donovan and I had created from absolute scratch. Then the security chime echoed through the hallway. It was a sharp, intrusive sound that immediately put me on edge. We were not expecting any deliveries, and our community gates required clearance for visitors. I walked over to the digital security panel on the wall and pulled up the front porch camera feed. My heart stopped beating for a full 3 seconds. The coffee mug nearly slipped from my trembling fingers. Standing on my porch, holding a large designer umbrella, was a woman I had not seen in nearly a decade. It was my mother, Beatrice. She looked exactly the same as she did the day she told me I was dead to her. She wore a perfectly tailored beige trench coat, her signature pearl necklace visible at her throat, and her hair was styled in that stiff, immovable way she always preferred. She stood with rigid, demanding posture, looking annoyed by the rain splashing against her expensive leather boots. She pressed the doorbell again, her face twisting into a scowl of impatience. A massive wave of conflicting emotions crashed over me. Panic, anger, profound sadness, and a fierce protective instinct all fought for dominance in my mind. For a brief second, the wounded daughter inside me wondered if she was here to apologize. Perhaps she had realized the cruelty of her actions. Perhaps she wanted to beg for forgiveness and finally meet the grandson she had ignored for 5 years. But the cold, calculating look in her eyes on the security monitor told a very different story. I set my mug down on the console table, took a deep, steadying breath to calm my racing pulse, and unlocked the heavy mahogany front door. The cold, damp air rushed into the foyer, but it was nothing compared to the icy chill of my mother's presence. She did not smile. She did not offer a hug. She did not even say hello. Instead, Beatrice immediately closed her umbrella, shook the water off on my covered porch, and brushed right past me into my home as if she owned the place. She stepped onto the imported hardwood floors of my foyer, her eyes darting around the space with sharp, evaluating precision. I stood frozen by the open door, absolutely stunned by her audacity. 8 years of total estrangement. 8 years of missing holidays. My wedding. The birth of my child, and her first instinct was to inspect my home like a real estate appraiser. I watched her take in the vaulted ceilings, the modern chandelier, the expensive artwork hanging on the walls. I could practically see the gears turning in her mind, calculating the square footage, and estimating our property value. "You have done well for yourself," Beatrice stated, her tone flat and completely devoid of maternal warmth. She ran a critical finger along the edge of a sleek console table, checking for dust that was not there. "The neighborhood is a bit ostentatious for my taste, but I suppose it is a step up from that miserable little studio apartment you were living in when you decided to abandon your family." The sheer gaslighting in her opening statement was breathtaking. I closed the front door, the heavy click of the lock echoing loudly in the silent foyer. "I did not abandon my family," I said, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. "You disowned me, Beatrice. You and Dad threw me away because you hated the man I chose to marry. You told me never to contact you again." Beatrice waved her hand dismissively, an arrogant gesture I remembered all too well from my childhood. "Oh, Courtney, please do not be so overly dramatic. We were all highly emotional back then. It was simply a mutual cooling-off period. You know how your father gets when his authority is questioned? We felt you needed time to realize the mistake you were making, but that is all in the past now." A mutual cooling-off period. She was actually trying to reframe nearly a decade of racist rejection and cruel abandonment as a temporary family disagreement. My hands balled into tight fists at my sides. I wanted to scream, to demand an apology, to throw her back out into the rain. But before I could formulate a response that did not involve pure rage, Beatrice reached into her large designer tote bag. She pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder and dropped it unceremoniously onto my entryway table. The folder landed with a loud, authoritative thud that made my skin crawl. She patted the top of it gently, her lips curving into a smug, self-satisfied smirk. "Now that Donovan's little computer project has finally paid off," Beatrice announced, her voice dripping with extreme condescension, "your father and I have drawn up a comprehensive list of family investments. We have outlined several critical ventures that require immediate capital to ensure the continuation of our family legacy. We expect the initial transfer of funds to be completed by this Friday." I stared at the manila folder, my mind struggling to process the absolute insanity of her words. She was standing in the home my husband and I bought with the money we earned from a company we built from absolute scratch. She was standing there after calling my husband's life's work a little computer project. She had ignored my existence for 8 years because of her own deep-seated prejudice, yet she felt entirely entitled to show up on a random Tuesday and demand a massive payout just because Donovan's cybersecurity firm had recently gone public. "You cannot be serious," I whispered, staring at her in sheer disbelief. "You have not spoken to me in over 8 years. You do not know me. You do not know my husband. You do not even know your own grandson. And you came here to demand money." Beatrice sighed dramatically, acting as if I was a slow child who was failing to grasp a simple concept. "Courtney, you are a part of this family whether you like it or not. When one part of the family experiences a sudden windfall of real wealth, it is their duty to elevate the rest of the family. Your father's logistics company is expanding, and we require liquidity. We are giving you the opportunity to finally prove your loyalty and earn your place back at our table." She tapped the folder again, her eyes gleaming with toxic entitlement. "The routing numbers for your father's business accounts are on the second page. Have your accountant handle the transfer by Friday afternoon. We will not accept any delays. Family must stick together, Courtney, especially when there is a fortune to manage." The silence that followed was suffocating. I looked at this woman, this stranger who shared my DNA, and realized that she had not changed at all. She was still the exact same arrogant, controlling, manipulative person who had tried to destroy my happiness. She truly believed that throwing a financial demand in my face was somehow a generous offer of reconciliation. She believed that $53 million could buy her way back into my life without a single word of apology for the immense pain she had caused. My shock slowly dissolved, replaced by a cold, protective fury. I looked from the manila folder on the table to my mother's expectant, demanding face, and I knew exactly what I had to do. I did not reach for the folder. I did not even lean toward it. I simply kept my hands perfectly still at my sides and maintained unbroken eye contact with the woman who had birthed me. The silence in the foyer stretched out, becoming thick and heavy, competing only with the sound of the rain lashing against the front windows. I could see the slight twitch in her jaw. Beatrice was waiting for me to eagerly grab the document, to weep with gratitude that I was finally being allowed back into the hallowed halls of her conditional love. She expected the desperate 25-year-old girl she had kicked out of her home to still be standing in front of her. "Take that folder," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion, "and walk right back out that door." My mother blinked, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows knitting together in genuine confusion. It was clear that outright defiance was not a scenario she had planned for. She let out a sharp, breathless laugh, adjusting the collar of her expensive trench coat. "Courtney, do not be absurd. I know you harbor some lingering resentment over our little disagreement, but it is time to put childish grievances aside. We are talking about generational wealth now. We are talking about legacy. Your father and I are willing to oversee the integration of Donovan's newfound capital into the primary family trust. You should be thanking me." I stared at her, marveling at the sheer psychological gymnastics required to utter those words. A little disagreement. That was how she categorized refusing to attend my wedding. That was how she summarized looking me in the eyes 8 years ago and telling me that my future husband was a stain on her pristine country club reputation. She had looked at Donovan, a brilliant, hardworking man with a master's degree and a heart of gold, and reduced him to nothing but a racist stereotype because his skin was dark and he did not come from trust fund money. "You do not get to use the word family," I told her, stepping forward so that I was only inches away from her. "You do not get to walk into the home that my husband paid for, breathing the air that my husband's success provides, and demand a single dime. There is no primary family trust for us. You and Dad made that crystal clear when you cut me off financially and socially. You made your choice 8 years ago. Now you get to live with it." Beatrice stiffened, her posture becoming even more rigid. The faux maternal warmth vanished instantly, replaced by the calculating, glacial demeanor of a woman used to getting exactly what she wanted. "You are acting like an ungrateful teenager," she snapped, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. "I told you that was simply a mutual cooling off period. We knew you needed a harsh dose of reality to see reason. We were waiting for you to come to your senses. Now that there is real wealth involved, serious money that requires sophisticated management, families must stick together. You and that husband of yours have no idea how to handle a $53 million valuation. You are going to attract the wrong kind of attention. We are offering you our protection and our financial infrastructure." The absolute delusion of her statement was almost impressive. She genuinely believed that her outdated, failing logistics business and her country club connections were somehow superior to the global cybersecurity empire Donovan had built. She thought she was doing us a favor by offering to absorb our hard-earned money into her mismanaged accounts. I let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "Protection. You want to protect us?" I asked, shaking my head. "No, Beatrice. You want to parasite off us. You read an article in a local business journal about Donovan's company going public, you saw the valuation, and you decided it was time to cash in on the daughter you threw away. You do not care about me, you do not care about my husband, and you certainly do not care about the grandson you have never bothered to meet. You are just looking for a bailout." Her face flushed, a deep, ugly shade of crimson. The polite facade completely shattered. The mask slipped, revealing the ugly, prejudiced core that had driven us apart in the first place. I watched her eyes dart around my luxurious foyer again. But this time there was no calculation, only pure, unfiltered resentment. "I am trying to save you from absolute ruin, Courtney," she hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Do you honestly think this little tech bubble will last? Do you think a man from his background knows how to sustain this kind of success? People like him do not know how to handle real money. They get a little bit of cash and they blow it on flashy cars and cheap thrills. He is not one of us. He never will be. It is in his nature. Give it a few years and he will drag you right back down to the gutter he crawled out of. I am giving you a chance to secure your assets with people of your own pedigree before he ruins you." The coded racist remark hit the air like a physical blow. She did not use a slur, she was too concerned with plausible deniability for that, but the implication was loud, clear, and absolutely disgusting. She was standing in the very house Donovan had bought for us, insulting his character, his intelligence, and his heritage, all while demanding the money he had earned. A cold, protective fury ignited in my chest, burning away any tiny, lingering shred of familial obligation I might have subconsciously held on to. My husband was a man who had worked 16-hour days coding until his fingers cramped, sacrificing everything to build a secure future for our son. He was a man of immense integrity and brilliance, and this woman who had never worked a hard day in her life dared to question his nature. I reached out, grabbed the thick manila folder off the console table, and shoved it hard against her chest. She stumbled back a half step, startled by my sudden physical motion. "Take your garbage and get out of my house," I commanded, my voice lethal and steady. "Courtney, you are making a massive mistake," she sputtered, clutching the folder against her expensive coat. "You turn your back on us now and you will regret it. When his little company crashes, do not come crying to your father and me." "I will never come crying to you," I said, staring directly into her shocked, angry eyes. "Because we do not need you. Donovan and I built our empire without a single drop of your toxic conditional support. We starved together, we struggled together, and we succeeded together. You have absolutely no power here. You are nothing to us. Do not ever set foot on my property again." I did not wait for her to formulate another hateful response. I grabbed the brass handle of my front door and physically backed her out onto the covered porch. The rain was still coming down in sheets, blowing a fine mist across her perfectly styled hair. She opened her mouth to speak, her face twisted in a mask of pure indignation. But I slammed the heavy mahogany door shut with a resounding, definitive crash. I quickly threw the deadbolt, the sharp mechanical click echoing in the silent foyer. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My breathing was shallow and fast. I stood there for a long time, staring at the solid wood of the door, listening to the muffled sound of her angry footsteps retreating down the walkway. A moment later, I heard the heavy thud of a car door slamming, followed by the roar of an engine accelerating away down the street. She was gone. But as the adrenaline slowly began to recede from my veins, a cold realization settled over me. This was not the end. Beatrice and my father Harrison were not the type of people to accept rejection gracefully. They were sharks who had caught the scent of blood in the water. They had seen our success, they had seen our home, and they felt entirely entitled to a massive piece of it. By throwing her out and rejecting her absurd demands, I had not just ended a conversation. I had officially declared war. I had wounded her massive ego, and I knew exactly how my family operated when their pride was damaged. They would not simply walk away and leave us in peace. They would try to destroy what they could not control. They would try to tear down the beautiful life Donovan and I had built just to prove a point. I paused at the bottom of the stairs, leaning my forehead against the cool wooden banister. The physical shaking had stopped, but the emotional aftershocks were rippling through my entire body. I replayed her words in my head. People like him. Not one of us. His nature. The sheer venom in those phrases made my stomach turn. For 8 years, I had convinced myself that their absence was a blessing, a shield that kept their toxicity away from my marriage and my son. But her sudden appearance proved that their prejudice had not softened with time. It had only festered, mutating into a greedy entitlement that was almost hard to comprehend. I thought about the manila folder she had clutched so desperately. It was not just a prop. It was a physical manifestation of their arrogance. They had actually sat down, likely with their overpriced lawyers and accountants, and drafted a strategy to extract millions of dollars from the black son-in-law they had deemed unworthy to sit at their dining room table. They had drawn up routing numbers and deadlines, fully expecting me to be so desperate for their validation that I would blindly hand over the keys to our financial kingdom. It was sick. It was a level of narcissistic delusion that bordered on complete madness. I looked up the sweeping staircase toward the second floor. Upstairs, my husband was continuing to build a legacy of brilliance and innovation. In his office, he was making decisions that shaped an entire industry. And down here in the foyer, I had just banished the ghosts of my past back out into the rain. I felt a profound sense of clarity wash over me. The lines had been drawn. The boundaries were set in stone. I was no longer the scared 25-year-old girl seeking her mother's approval. I was a 33-year-old woman, a partner in a $53 million enterprise, a mother and a fierce protector of my own family. I took a deep breath, pushing the lingering smell of her expensive perfume out of my lungs. The scent of rain and my own coffee replaced it, grounding me back in my reality. Beatrice thought she could march in here and command obedience through fear and insults. She thought she could weaponize my husband's race and background to make me doubt our security. She was wrong on every single level. The war had started, but she had fundamentally underestimated her opponent. I was not going to play defense. I was going to secure every single perimeter of our lives. I began walking up the stairs, my steps firm and resolute. It was time to tell Donovan exactly what had just happened, and it was time to prepare for the inevitable storm my family was about to bring to our doorstep. I found Donovan standing at the top of the landing. He had just finished his morning video call, his tie loosened, a tablet tucked under his arm. He took one look at my face, and his professional demeanor vanished entirely. He knew my expressions better than anyone. He could read the tension in my shoulders and the tight set of my jaw. He set his tablet down on the hall table and crossed the distance between us in 2 long strides. He wrapped his arms around me, pulling me against his chest. His embrace was warm and solid, a stark contrast to the freezing encounter I had just survived. I buried my face in his shirt, taking a deep breath of his familiar cedar and citrus cologne. "Who was at the gate?" he asked, his voice a low, calming rumble. The security notification popped up on my screen, but I was mid-sentence with the board. I pulled back just enough to look into his dark, intelligent eyes. It was Beatrice. Donovan went perfectly still. His jaw tightened, and I saw a flash of raw, protective anger ignite in his gaze. "Your mother. After 8 years, what did she want?" I let out a harsh breath, stepping back to pace the length of the upstairs hallway. She wanted money. She actually showed up with a manila folder full of routing numbers for my father's failing logistics company. She demanded a transfer by Friday. She called your company a little computer project and said we needed her help to manage our new real wealth. Donovan crossed his arms over his chest. A humorless smile touched the corners of his mouth. A little computer project. That is rich coming from a woman whose husband is drowning in regional supply chain debt. I assume you sent her packing. I shoved the folder right back into her chest and slammed the door in her face, I said. But Donovan, she said things. The same things she said 8 years ago. She implied you were going to ruin me. She questioned your nature. She has not changed one bit. Donovan stepped forward and gently took my hand, stopping my pacing. He looked down at me, his expression completely unshaken. We knew they had not changed, Courtney. People like Beatrice and Harrison do not change. They only adjust their tactics when there is a payout involved. His calm certainty grounded me. It reminded me of the man I had fallen in love with nearly a decade ago. Back then, Donovan was not a tech titan with a $53 million valuation. He was a brilliant, exhausted software developer, working out of a cramped studio apartment that smelled permanently of stale coffee and burnt toast. He had a vision, a mountain of student debt, and a heart that saw right through my family's toxic pretenses. I remember the exact moment I introduced him to my parents. I had brought him to their sprawling estate for a Sunday dinner, foolishly hoping they would see his brilliant mind and his gentle soul. Instead, they saw a black man with no trust fund, no country club pedigree, and no inherited wealth. The dinner had been a masterclass in passive-aggressive hostility. My father, Harrison, had interrogated Donovan about his background, sneering at his public university education. Beatrice had spent the entire evening asking loaded questions about how exactly Donovan planned to provide for a woman of my station on a programmer's salary. Donovan handled their microaggressions with absolute grace, but the real explosion happened after he left. My parents cornered me in the formal dining room, the crystal chandelier casting harsh light on their furious faces. They demanded I end the relationship immediately. "You are repeating history," Donovan said, pulling me out of my memories. He gently squeezed my hands. They tried to buy you out of our relationship back then, and now they are trying to buy their way back into it. It is sick, I replied, my voice shaking with a fresh wave of anger. I looked at her today, and all I could see was that night. The night they gave me the ultimatum. They looked at me with absolute disgust and said that marrying you would taint the family's social standing. Donovan let out a short, bitter laugh. Ah, yes. The sacred country club standing. Heaven forbid the Harrison Logistics dynasty be associated with a broke developer from the wrong side of the tracks. I shook my head, the bitter taste of that night rising in my throat. It was not just about you being broke, Donovan. We both know that. My brother Cameron was broke too. Cameron had blown through 3 different college funds, wrecked 2 expensive cars, and was swimming in debt. But Cameron was given a corner office and a 6-figure salary at Dad's company simply because he fit their mold. He looked like them. He played their game. You did not fit their mold. You were a self-made black man who did not care about their country club memberships or their pretentious social galas. You exposed their mediocrity simply by existing and working hard, and they hated you for it. I remember my mother's face that night. She had gripped my shoulders, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my skin. She told me that if I walked down the aisle with you, I would be dead to them. She said she would not attend a wedding that made a mockery of our family name. She told me I had to choose. Call off the wedding, marry a man from our circle, and keep my place in the family will, or marry you and be completely cut off financially, socially, and permanently. They thought the threat of poverty would terrify me into submission. They thought I was too weak to survive without their credit cards and their social safety net. They believed I would cave under the pressure. Donovan reached up and tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear. His touch was incredibly gentle. But you did not cave. You packed your bags that very night. You walked out of a multi-million-dollar estate and moved into my tiny, freezing apartment. You chose me. I chose us, I corrected him. I chose a life that was real over a life that was performative. And I would make the exact same choice today. I do not care about their money. I never did. I reminded him of the immediate fallout after I left the estate. My father had instantly frozen my bank accounts. He had canceled my health insurance and called my car leasing company to report the vehicle as stolen until I surrendered the keys. I was left with nothing but a suitcase of clothes and the small savings from my entry-level job. But Donovan did not panic. He simply cleared out half of his tiny closet, helped me unpack, and promised we would figure it out. We lived on cheap pasta and clearance rack vegetables for 2 years. While Donovan coded the initial framework for his cybersecurity software, late into the night I sat beside him at a wobbly second-hand table, designing the data architecture that would eventually make his system revolutionary. We were a team in the truest sense of the word. We built our empire on late nights, exhausted tears, and an unshakable belief in each other. My parents missed all of it. They missed our small, beautiful courthouse wedding. They missed the celebration when we landed our first major enterprise client. They missed the terrifying, joyful days of my pregnancy with Leo. They chose their prejudice over my presence. Now, staring into Donovan's eyes, I felt a profound sense of vindication. We did not need their validation then, and we certainly did not need their financial management now. I know they want our money, Donovan said, his voice bringing me back to the present. But now they care about our influence too. Beatrice did not show up here today just to make amends or even just to beg for cash. She showed up because the IPO made headlines. Harrison's logistics company is bleeding money. Industry rumors say they are desperately over-leveraged. They need an injection of capital to stay afloat, and they think they can bully us into opening our checkbook. I rested my head against his shoulder, letting the reality of the situation settle in. They sent Beatrice to test the waters, to see if they could intimidate me into compliance. When that failed, she resorted to her old racist insults. It was a calculated move to throw me off balance. Donovan pulled back, his dark eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that commanded the room. They underestimated you 8 years ago, Courtney. And they are underestimating you now. They think because you are their daughter, They can push the right buttons and make you fall in line. They think I am just some lucky tech guy who hit the jackpot and they want to swoop in and manage our assets before we supposedly lose it all. We are not going to give them a single cent, I said, my voice hardening into steel. I want them cut off completely. I want extra security at the gate. I want the school notified that Beatrice is not authorized to be anywhere near Leo. If she thinks she can just march into my life and demand a piece of the empire we built, she is absolutely delusional. Donovan nodded in agreement. I will call security right now and have her added to the neighborhood ban list. I will also contact the legal team. If Harrison and Beatrice are digging around our financials, we need to know exactly what they are looking at. We need to be 10 steps ahead. I agreed. The days of me shrinking away from their toxicity were over. 8 years ago, I walked away quietly because I just wanted peace. I wanted to build my life with the man I loved, without the constant drain of their prejudice and control. But Beatrice crossing my threshold changed the rules of engagement. They had brought the war to my front door. We need to lock this down. Donovan continued, his mind already shifting into executive mode. Cameron is still out there, and he acts as Harrison's proxy. If Beatrice failed to break you today, they will send your brother next. They operate like a cartel. When the intimidation tactic fails, they will try the emotional manipulation route. My older brother, Cameron. The mere mention of his name made my jaw clench. Cameron had always been the golden boy, the one who could do no wrong. He was the perfect reflection of Harrison and Beatrice. He was arrogant, entitled, and utterly average. We stood there in the upstairs hallway of the home we had earned a united front. The storm outside continued to rage, but the storm inside my heart had settled into a cold, calculated focus. My parents had made their choice 8 years ago when they chose their bigotry and their country club status over their own daughter. They had drawn a line in the sand, and I had respected it. Now, because the balance of power had shifted, they wanted to erase that line and rewrite history. I was not going to let that happen. I was going to protect my husband, protect my son, and protect the massive success we had achieved against all odds. If my family wanted a fight over real wealth, they were about to get one. We will handle Cameron just like we handled Beatrice, I said, my voice steady, with absolute zero tolerance. Donovan nodded, a tight, approving smile touching his lips. He reached out his hand, resting on the small of my back as he guided me into his home office. The room was a sanctuary of modern design and quiet power, surrounded by massive monitors displaying real-time analytics of the cybersecurity empire we had built. He sank into his leather desk chair and pulled me gently down to sit on his lap. I rested my head against his shoulder, letting the steady rhythm of his heartbeat ground me. Zero tolerance is the only language your brother understands, Donovan said quietly, his fingers tracing slow circles on my arm. Cameron has never faced a single consequence in his entire 35 years on this earth. Why would he start now? I scoffed, the sound bitter and sharp in the quiet room. Cameron is the exact replica of Harrison. They engineered him to be the perfect heir to the logistics throne, regardless of his actual abilities. The contrast between how my parents treated Cameron and how they treated me was a staggering study in hypocrisy. When Cameron announced he was getting married to a woman whose family owned a string of luxury car dealerships, Beatrice and Harrison threw a celebration that rivaled a royal coronation. I was entirely cut off and living in squalor at the time, but the photos from their country club extravaganza were splashed across every social media platform and local society page. My parents had happily written a check for $200,000 to cover that wedding. They paid for imported orchids, an 8-tier cake covered in edible gold leaf, and a live orchestra. They rented out the entire grand ballroom of the very same country club that they claimed Donovan would taint with his presence. Cameron was given the world on a silver platter. I murmured, my voice tight with old, unhealed frustration. Do you remember the announcement they put in the business journal when he got married? Donovan let out a low, humorless chuckle. How could I forget? They listed his title as Vice President of Operations for Harrison Logistics. The man could not even balance his own checkbook. It was the ultimate insult. Cameron had practically failed out of a mid-tier university. He had zero qualifications in supply chain management, zero understanding of enterprise logistics, and absolutely no work ethic. Yet the day after his $200,000 wedding, Harrison handed him a vice president title, a corner office with a mahogany desk, and a six-figure salary. Cameron was given a kingdom he did not earn simply because he played the role of the compliant, acceptable golden child. He married the right woman, wore the right suits, and regurgitated Harrison's arrogant opinions at dinner parties. Meanwhile, I had been completely erased from the family narrative. We got married on a rainy Tuesday at the downtown courthouse. I wore a simple white dress I bought off a clearance rack for $40. Donovan wore a borrowed suit that was slightly too big in the shoulders. We did not have a live orchestra or a towering cake. We had two witnesses we barely knew and a celebratory dinner of pepperoni pizza on the floor of our apartment. But looking at Donovan as we said our vows, I felt richer than Harrison and Beatrice ever had. While Cameron and his new bride were toasting with vintage champagne on a yacht in the Mediterranean, Donovan and I were fighting for our absolute survival. Donovan wrapped his arms tighter around my waist, pressing a soft kiss to my temple. We did not need their champagne, Courtney. Look at what we built while they were busy playing dress-up. I closed my eyes, letting the memories of those early, brutal years wash over me. When my father froze my bank accounts and canceled my health insurance, I had nothing. But Donovan took me in. We moved into a tiny, drafty studio apartment situated directly above a noisy, all-night laundromat. The constant thrum of the washing machines vibrated through our cheap floorboards day and night. We had no heating in the winter, and the summer heat was completely suffocating. We lived on instant noodles, peanut butter sandwiches, and sheer adrenaline, Donovan said, his voice thick with emotion as he recalled those days. Do you remember our dining table? I smiled against his shirt, a genuine smile breaking through the lingering anger. It was a cardboard box covered with a cheap plastic tablecloth. Exactly, Donovan said. And that cardboard box is where the foundation of a $53 million company was born. I sat on the floor coding until my vision blurred and my fingers cramped. I was running entirely on tap water and cheap instant coffee. I was so exhausted I could barely see the screen. But every time I wanted to quit, every time the venture capitalists rejected our pitch, because I did not fit their narrow, prejudiced profile of a tech founder, I looked across that cardboard box at you. I opened my eyes, meeting his intense, loving gaze. I had not just sat by idly while he worked. I had poured my entire soul into our survival. While Donovan built the software, I utilized my degree to design the complex data architecture that made his code revolutionary. We could not afford to buy whiteboards, so I had taped cheap paper across every inch of our apartment walls. I had mapped out the entire relational database using colored markers on the back of old wrapping paper. I designed the encryption protocols that would eventually make our software impenetrable to cyber attacks. My brain ached constantly from the sheer volume of algorithms I was processing, and my hands were permanently calloused. But every line of code Donovan wrote and every schema I designed was a brick in the wall we were building to protect our future. You were the brilliant architect, Donovan whispered, his hand gently cupping my cheek. They called my company a little computer project today, but they have absolutely no idea that you were the mastermind behind the data flow. When we were eating 60-cent noodles and wrapping ourselves in cheap blankets to survive the winter, you were drafting the exact algorithms that just took this company public. We bled for this. We starved for this. We built an impenetrable fortress out of nothing but our own grit and our faith in each other. The memory of that struggle was a stark defining line between us and my family. Beatrice and Harrison had wanted me to fail. They had actively bet on our destruction. They believed that pulling their financial safety net would send me crawling back to their gated estate, begging for forgiveness, and ready to marry whoever they deemed acceptable. They wanted the cold and the hunger to break my spirit. Instead, the struggle had forged me into steel. I looked at the massive monitors on Donovan's desk, tracking the real-time stock price of the company we had bled for. The green numbers ticked upward, representing a $53 million valuation. $53 million. It was a staggering amount of money, a testament to the thousands of hours we had spent working in the dark, ignoring the exhaustion, the fear, and the cruel rejection of the people who were supposed to love me. "We earned every single penny of this," I said, my voice dropping to a fierce, resolute whisper. "We paid for this success with our own sweat. Nobody handed us a corner office. Nobody wrote us a $200,000 check. We took the absolute worst they could throw at us and we turned it into an empire." Donovan nodded, his expression turning deadly serious. He leaned in close, his gaze burning into mine with an intensity that left no room for doubt. "And that is exactly why they will never see a single cent of it. Not one dime, Courtney. I do not care if Harrison's company goes bankrupt. I do not care if Cameron loses his precious vice president title and has to actually work for a living. I do not care if Beatrice has to sell her designer coats to pay her country club dues. They made their choice 8 years ago when they told you that you were dead to them." I felt a profound, unbreakable agreement settle over me. The vow was not born out of petty vindictiveness. It was born out of absolute justice. My family had tried to weaponize their wealth to control my life and destroy my husband. Now that the tables had turned, I was not going to play the role of the forgiving, compliant daughter. I was not going to fund the lifestyle of the people who had looked at the man I loved and deemed him unworthy of basic human respect. "This money belongs to Leo," I said, picturing our 5-year-old son sleeping peacefully down the hall. "It belongs to the future we are creating for him. A future where he will never be judged by the color of his skin or the balance of his bank account. A future where love is not a transaction. If we give Harrison and Beatrice a single dollar, we are validating their abuse. We are telling them that their cruelty was acceptable. I will burn this money before I let them touch it. They get nothing, I promise," sealing the vow. "We will not bail out Harrison's failing company. We will not fund Cameron's lavish lifestyle. We will not give Beatrice the satisfaction of managing our wealth so she can brag to her friends about her successful daughter. They abandoned us when we had nothing. They do not get to claim us now that we have everything." Donovan pressed his forehead against mine, sealing the promise between us. "We protect our own," he said softly. "We protect Leo. We protect the life we built. The rest of them can drown in the bed they made." We stayed like that for a long moment, drawing strength from the shared history of our survival. The rain continued to batter the windows of the home office, but inside the atmosphere was completely clear. The emotional manipulation that Beatrice had tried to plant in my foyer had failed entirely. Instead of making me feel guilty or obligated, her arrival had only reminded me of exactly why I had walked away. It had reminded me of the freezing apartment, the instant noodles, the desperate late nights, and the incredible, brilliant man who had held my hand through all of it. It reminded me of the beautiful, unbreakable family I had chosen. "Let Cameron come," I said, pulling back to look at my husband, a cold, strategic smile forming on my lips. "Let him try to play the peacemaker. Let him try to manipulate us. We know exactly who they are, Donovan, and we are going to watch them fail." Donovan smiled back, a fierce, protective glint in his eye. "Let them come," he agreed. "We are ready." The lines of war had been irrevocably drawn. My family wanted to play games with our $53 million empire, assuming we were naive enough to fall for their sudden displays of familial loyalty. They were about to learn a very hard, very expensive lesson. The daughter they threw away was gone forever. The woman who replaced her was not going to give them a single inch. It took exactly 3 days for the next wave of the offensive to arrive. Just as we predicted, my family did not retreat after Beatrice failed to secure her payout. Instead, they changed tactics and sent in their designated flying monkey. They sent my older brother, Cameron. But Cameron did not come to our gated community, and he certainly did not attempt to contact me. He knew I would shut him down before he even finished his first sentence. Instead, he decided to bypass the daughter they threw away and ambush the man they had once deemed entirely unacceptable. He went straight for Donovan. Donovan has a very strict morning routine. Every Thursday at 7 in the morning, before heading into the executive boardroom of his downtown corporate headquarters, he stops at a quiet, high-end artisanal coffee shop on the ground floor of his building. He likes the peace. He uses that time to review overnight data architecture reports and prepare his mental state for the day. He is a creature of habit, which unfortunately made him predictable to someone desperate enough to track his movements. Donovan was sitting at his usual corner table, a freshly brewed black coffee steaming next to his tablet, when a shadow fell across his screen. He looked up to find Cameron standing there. Donovan later told me that Cameron looked exactly like a man trying to project wealth while actively drowning in panic. My brother was wearing a tailored suit that was a few seasons out of date, a luxury watch that I knew for a fact he had bought on credit, and a tight, overly familiar smile that did not reach his eyes. Without waiting for an invitation, Cameron pulled out the chair across from Donovan and sat down, smoothing his silk tie with a practiced, arrogant gesture. "Donovan, my man," Cameron said, his voice dripping with artificial warmth, as if they were old fraternity brothers catching up over a beer. "It has been way too long. I was in the neighborhood for a meeting and figured I would drop by. The barista up front said you are a regular here. You are looking good. Success suits you." Donovan did not blink. He did not close his tablet. He simply sat back in his chair, resting his hands on the table, and studied my brother with the cold, analytical precision of a software engineer identifying a malicious virus in his system. He knew Cameron was not in the neighborhood for a meeting. Harrison Logistics was headquartered 40 miles away in the suburbs, and Cameron had never willingly woken up before 9 in the morning a day in his life. This was a targeted, calculated ambush. Cameron, Donovan said, his tone perfectly polite but absolutely devoid of welcome. "I would ask how you are, but I imagine you did not track down my morning coffee spot just to exchange pleasantries. What do you want?" Cameron let out a forced, hearty laugh, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the table to invade Donovan's personal space. "Always straight to business. I respect that. Look, I know Mom came by your place earlier this week, and I know things got a little heated with Courtney. You have to forgive Beatrice. She is from a different generation. She gets emotional and communicates poorly, but her heart is in the right place. I am actually here to play peacemaker. We are all adults here, Donovan. 8 years is a long time to hold on to a grudge." Donovan remained silent, letting the uncomfortable pause stretch out. Cameron shifted in his seat, the fake smile faltering for a fraction of a second before he pushed forward into his prepared script. "The truth is, things have been really tough back home." Cameron continued, dropping his voice to a solemn conspiratorial whisper. "Dad is not doing well. His health has been rapidly declining over the past year. The stress of running the logistics firm is literally killing him. The market has been brutal, supply chain issues are eating into our margins, and Harrison Logistics is struggling to maintain its footing. We are carrying a lot of overhead, and Dad is too proud to admit he needs help." Donovan listened to this sob story without showing a single ounce of sympathy. He knew the supply chain market was actually booming for companies with competent leadership. If Harrison Logistics was struggling, it was because Harrison and Cameron were mismanaging it into the ground. But Cameron was banking on Donovan possessing a soft heart. He was trying to weaponize the concept of family duty, hoping that the mention of a failing patriarch would trigger some sense of honorable obligation in my husband. "I am stepping up to take over the primary operations," Cameron said, puffing out his chest to project a false sense of authority. "But to save the company and take the burden off Dad so he can focus on his health, I need to restructure our debt and inject some fresh capital into our infrastructure. We need to modernize. We need to upgrade our systems. We need a lifeline, Donovan. And honestly, I thought this could be a perfect opportunity for us to bridge the gap between our families." Cameron finally reached the entire point of his uninvited visit. He leaned in closer, dropping his voice even lower, checking to make sure no one at the neighboring tables was listening. "I saw the news about your company going public. 53 million is a massive valuation. Congratulations, seriously. It proves you have real business acumen. Because I respect what you have built, I want to offer you a private partnership. I am looking for a $2 million seed injection to stabilize Harrison Logistics. In exchange, I can offer you preferred equity in our company." Donovan stared at him, letting the sheer absurdity of the request settle in the air. But Cameron was not finished. He had to add the ultimate arrogant insult wrapped in what he genuinely believed was a compliment. He could not just ask for a business loan. He had to frame it as a favor he was granting to us. Look, Donovan, Cameron said, flashing that entitled superior smile. We both know things started off on the wrong foot with my parents. They were protective of Courtney, and they did not understand your background. It is hard for old money to understand new money dynamics. But you have proven yourself now. You have made real money. This $2 million investment is not just a business deal. It is a gesture of goodwill. It is a way to show Dad that you are willing to support the family legacy. This is your chance, Donovan. If you step up and save his company, all is forgiven. This is your opportunity to finally earn your place at the family table. Donovan told me later that it took every ounce of self-control he possessed not to reach across the table and physically remove Cameron from the coffee shop. The absolute staggering racism and entitlement embedded in that statement were almost suffocating. Cameron was sitting there begging for a $2 million bailout for his own failing, mismanaged company, yet he was framing it as a privilege for Donovan. He was acting as if Donovan handing over millions of dollars to the people who had treated him like garbage was somehow an honor. They still viewed Donovan as an outsider who needed to buy his way into their prestigious, entirely bankrupt circle. Cameron sat back, looking incredibly pleased with himself. He took a sip of his water, acting as if he had just delivered a masterclass in corporate negotiation. He truly believed he had presented an offer that a man from Donovan's background could not possibly refuse. He thought the allure of being accepted by the Harrison family was worth $2 million. He thought the promise of sitting at a dining room table with people who despised us was a prize we had been secretly longing for over the past 8 years. Donovan did not break eye contact. He analyzed the sweat forming on Cameron's upper lip. He noticed the slight nervous tremor in Cameron's hands. This was not a confident businessman offering a lucrative partnership. This was a drowning man grasping at a luxury yacht and trying to convince the captain that the drowning man was actually doing the rescuing. "You want $2 million?" Donovan stated, his voice devoid of any warmth or consideration. "You want $2 million to save a company you have run into the ground, and you are offering me a seat at a table I have absolutely no desire to sit at." Cameron's smug smile wavered. He leaned forward again, his tone turning slightly defensive. "It is an investment, Donovan. It is a way to unite the families. Courtney would be thrilled to have her father back in her life. Do not make this harder than it needs to be. We are offering you a clean slate." Donovan slowly closed his tablet and stood up from the table, towering over my brother. He looked down at Cameron, observing the desperate entitlement-fueled facade cracking under the weight of his silent scrutiny. The coffee shop around them buzzed with the morning rush of executives and tech developers, none of them aware of the intense psychological standoff occurring in the corner. Cameron's eyes darted around the room, suddenly highly conscious of the power dynamic shifting entirely out of his control. He had walked into Donovan's territory, expecting to dictate terms, relying on the old family hierarchy that dictated Courtney's husband was beneath him. Instead, he found himself utterly exposed. Donovan picked up his coffee cup, his expression unreadable, preparing to deliver a response that would shatter Cameron's delusions of grandeur and push my desperate brother into launching a truly malicious counterattack. The peacemaker act had completely failed, and the true hostility was about to begin. Donovan held Cameron's gaze, letting the absolute silence of the coffee shop corner amplify the weight of his next words. He did not raise his voice. He did not show anger. He simply delivered a rejection so thorough and precise that it left no room for negotiation. Cameron Donovan began, his tone calm and measured. "Harrison Logistics is carrying $40 million in unsecured debt. Your operational overhead is bleeding you dry, and your client retention rate has plummeted by 30% in the last quarter alone. A $2 million injection is not a seed investment. It is a bandage on a gunshot wound. From a purely business standpoint, your company is a toxic asset, and I do not throw my money into sinking ships." Cameron's face went rigid. The arrogant fraternal smile vanished, replaced by a flush of genuine panicked anger. He opened his mouth to argue, but Donovan raised a single hand, silencing him instantly. Furthermore, Donovan continued, his voice dropping an octave, "Let us address the personal side of this ridiculous proposal. You are offering me a seat at a table that your parents barred me from 8 years ago. You are offering me the privilege of paying $2 million to bail out the very people who looked my wife in the eye and told her she was dead to them for choosing me. Do you honestly think I want your acceptance? I built my own table, Cameron, and you and your parents are not invited to sit at it. The answer is no. It will always be no. Cameron stared at Donovan, his breath hitching slightly as the reality of the rejection set in. The peacemaker facade was entirely gone. He realized that Donovan could not be intimidated, bought, or manipulated. The Harrison family playbook, which relied heavily on financial coercion and social pressure, was completely useless against a man who had built his own fortune. "You arrogant son of a—" Cameron started leaning across the small table, his voice a low, hostile hiss. "You think because you got lucky with some tech bubble that you are better than us? You think you can just buy Courtney's loyalty and keep her isolated from her real family?" Donovan did not flinch. He simply watched Cameron unravel. "We know what you are doing." "Donovan," Cameron accused, his hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly, his knuckles turned white. "You brainwashed her. Courtney would never turn her back on her own blood if you had not poisoned her mind against us. You isolated her so you could control her. You are manipulating her into keeping all this new wealth to yourself." The sheer projection of Cameron's statement was staggering. He was accusing Donovan of the exact controlling, manipulative behavior that Harrison and Beatrice had perfected over 3 decades. "Courtney made her choice 8 years ago." Donovan replied, his voice completely steady. "She chose freedom over your family's toxicity. I did not isolate her. I simply provided a safe environment where she did not have to earn love by obeying arbitrary, prejudiced rules." "You are a fraud." Cameron spat, his volume rising slightly, drawing the attention of a nearby businessman. "You and Courtney are hoarding that money while Dad is sick. You are turning your back on family. But do not think you have won. We are not just going to walk away and let you cut us out entirely." Cameron stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. He looked down at Donovan, a malicious, triumphant gleam returning to his eyes. He had failed to secure the $2 million, but he had one last desperate card to play, a threat designed to strike at the absolute core of our lives. "You know," Cameron said, adjusting his suit jacket, his tone turning dangerously casual. "Mom was really heartbroken when Courtney slammed the door in her face. She just wanted to reconnect. More importantly, she wants to meet her grandson." Donovan's posture shifted. The relaxed professional demeanor evaporated, replaced by a coiled, immediate tension. He stared at Cameron, waiting. "Dad has been talking to his lawyers," Cameron continued, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. "They are very interested in the concept of grandparents' rights in this state. It is a tragedy, really, that a child is being kept away from his loving, wealthy grandparents. The courts tend to favor family reunification, especially when the grandparents can offer substantial cultural and social advantages. Mom is already documenting how Courtney's instability and your isolation tactics are detrimental to Leo's development." The threat hung in the air, a vile, calculated attempt to use our 5-year-old son as leverage. Cameron was essentially promising a brutal, protracted legal battle aimed at forcing us to hand over our child to the very people who had subjected me to a lifetime of psychological abuse. They were threatening to drag Leo into their toxic web simply to punish us for refusing their financial demands. "Tell Harrison to call his lawyers," Donovan said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm, lethal whisper. "Tell him to file the paperwork. Tell Beatrice to prepare her documentation. Because if your parents attempt to drag my son into a courtroom, I will not just defend my family. I will completely, systematically dismantle yours. I will use every resource I possess to expose exactly why Courtney left. I will open the vault on every piece of correspondence, every threat, and every racist email they ever sent. If you target my son Cameron, I will end the Harrison legacy permanently." Cameron stared at Donovan, the smirk faltering as he realized he had crossed a line he could not uncross. He had tried to use a child as a bargaining chip, and he had awakened a protective fury he was entirely unprepared to handle. "We will see about that," Cameron muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. He turned on his heel and strode out of the coffee shop, his desperate failed ambush concluding with a declaration of total war. Donovan sat at the table for a long moment, his coffee completely forgotten. He pulled out his phone and immediately called our head of security, authorizing a permanent ban on Cameron Harrison and Beatrice from entering our corporate offices or our residential neighborhood. He then called our primary legal counsel, instructing them to prepare for a potential, albeit legally dubious, custody battle initiated by my parents. When Donovan returned home that evening, the tension was palpable. He recounted the entire exchange in the coffee shop, detailing Cameron's staggering financial demands, the unhinged accusations of brainwashing, and finally the terrifying threat regarding grandparents' rights. I felt a cold dread wash over me. The idea of Beatrice and Harrison having any access to Leo made my stomach churn. I knew exactly how they operated. They would use Leo to hurt me. They would try to manipulate him to buy his affection and to plant the same seeds of inadequacy and conditional love that they had planted in me. They wanted to use my son as a weapon to force compliance and extort money. They cannot win that. Can they? I asked, pacing the length of our living room, my hands trembling slightly. They have never even met him. They have not tried to contact me in 8 years. They cannot just suddenly demand visitation rights because we went public. Legally, their case is extremely weak. Donovan assured me, intercepting my pacing and pulling me into a grounding embrace. Grandparents' rights usually apply in cases of divorce or the death of a parent, or if there is a pre-existing substantial relationship with the child that is being unfairly severed. They have none of that. It is a scare tactic, Courtney. They are trying to terrify us into settling. They want us to pay them the $2 million to make the lawsuit go away. It is extortion, I whispered, leaning my forehead against his chest. They are trying to extort us using our own child. Yes, Donovan agreed, his voice hard. But we are not going to be extorted. We are going to fight back. We are going to make sure they can never threaten our family again. The threat against Leo shifted the entire dynamic of the conflict. It was no longer just about rejecting their financial demands or protecting our peace. It was about neutralizing an active malicious threat to our son's safety. We could no longer simply ignore them and hope they would fade away. We had to take the offensive. We had to dismantle their power base completely. The next morning, the war escalated beyond private threats and coffee shop ambushes. My family realized that intimidation was not going to work, so they moved to their next strategy, destroying our public reputation and jeopardizing the $53 million company we had built. The smear campaign was about to begin. The calm before the storm lasted exactly 48 hours. I had spent that time organizing our security protocols and ensuring Leo's school was on high alert regarding my parents. Donovan had fully briefed his legal team about the potential grandparents' rights lawsuit. We were prepared for a localized, highly personal attack from my family. We were not prepared for them to take their malicious campaign to the press. It started on a Thursday morning. Donovan's phone began ringing incessantly before the sun had even risen. He answered the third call, his voice rough with sleep, but his tone immediately shifted to a sharp, awake, professional cadence. I sat up in bed, watching the tension radiate through his shoulders as he listened to his chief communications officer on the other end of the line. "They are running a piece in the Seattle Business Chronicle," Donovan said, his voice deadly calm as he ended the call and turned to me. "Someone leaked a highly distorted narrative about our company's origins." My stomach dropped. What kind of narrative? Donovan pulled up the article on his tablet and handed it to me. The headline was designed to inflict maximum damage: Tech Titans rise fueled by stolen logistics data, the dark secret behind Horizon Cyber's $53 million IPO. I felt the blood drain from my face as I read the opening paragraphs. The article did not name my father directly, referring instead to a prominent regional logistics CEO, but the implications were undeniable. The anonymous source claimed that during the brief period I worked at Harrison Logistics right after college, before I was disowned, I had illegally downloaded proprietary supply chain data. The article alleged that Donovan and I had used this stolen intellectual property to reverse engineer the predictive algorithms that formed the foundation of our cybersecurity software. It is a complete fabrication, I whispered, staring at the screen in horror. I worked in their human resources department. I never even had access to their logistics database. And our software has absolutely nothing to do with supply chain mechanics. It does not matter if it is true, Donovan replied, already moving toward the closet to get dressed. It only matters that it casts doubt on the integrity of our intellectual property right after our initial public offering. They are trying to spook our investors. They know they cannot win a legal battle, so they are trying to destroy our valuation in the court of public opinion. The execution was chillingly precise. Harrison and Cameron had clearly orchestrated the leak using their old money connections to ensure the story landed in a publication read by our key stakeholders. It was a classic Harrison family tactic. If you cannot control someone, destroy their reputation so thoroughly that they are forced to come crawling back for help. The fallout was immediate and deeply frustrating. By the time Donovan reached his office, Horizon Cyber's stock price had taken a noticeable hit. It was not a catastrophic crash, but a steady, concerning dip that signaled investor anxiety. The board of directors demanded an emergency meeting. Donovan had to spend the entire day defending the origins of his life's work, presenting audit logs and codebase histories to prove that our algorithms were built from scratch in our freezing apartment, not stolen from a failing logistics firm. The sheer audacity of my family's lie infuriated me. They were trying to take credit for the very software they had once dismissed as a little computer project. They wanted the world to believe that Donovan's brilliance was actually derived from Harrison's mediocre business. But the media leak was only the first phase of their smear campaign. While Harrison and Cameron attacked our business, Beatrice launched a secondary assault on our social standing. She decided it was time to play the role of the tragically abandoned mother. Donovan's company sponsors a major annual charity gala to support STEM education in underserved communities. It is a high-profile event, heavily covered by local media and attended by Seattle's elite. We had poured months of planning into this year's gala, eager to use our new platform to make a significant charitable impact. We arrived at the event feeling a mix of exhaustion from the week's crisis and determination to focus on the positive. The ballroom was stunning, the atmosphere was vibrant, and for a few hours I almost forgot the dark cloud my family had placed over us. Then, halfway through the evening, I felt a familiar icy dread wash over me. I was standing near the silent auction tables, speaking with a group of local educators, when the crowd parted slightly. Beatrice and Harrison were walking through the ballroom doors. They had not been invited. They had likely bought their way in or leveraged an old connection to secure a ticket. Beatrice was wearing a mournful expression and a designer gown, while Harrison looked stoic and aggrieved. They did not approach me immediately. Instead, they strategically positioned themselves near the press area where local journalists were conducting interviews. I watched in absolute disgust as Beatrice initiated her performance. When a reporter from the local lifestyle magazine recognized them, Beatrice practically collapsed into a practiced display of maternal sorrow. I could not hear every word, but her body language spoke volumes. She clutched a lace handkerchief, shaking her head sadly as she pointed vaguely in my direction. Harrison stood beside her, looking like a disappointed patriarch bearing a heavy burden. I immediately signaled to Donovan, who was across the room. He saw them, and his jaw tightened. We moved together, intending to quietly have security escort them out, but we were too late. A journalist eager for a scoop following the recent business article intercepted us. "Courtney," the reporter asked, holding out a microphone, "your parents are here tonight. Your mother just shared that she has been trying desperately to reconnect with you and her grandson since your sudden departure from the family. How do you respond to allegations that you abandoned them as soon as your husband's company found financial success?" The trap had been perfectly laid. If I exploded in anger, I would validate Beatrice's narrative that I was an unstable, vindictive daughter. If I refused to comment, I would look guilty and cold. Beatrice was standing a few yards away, watching me with a look of pure, triumphant malice. She thought she had outmaneuvered me. My husband and I are here tonight to support STEM education, I said, keeping my voice impeccably calm and projecting absolute serenity. We prefer to keep our charitable focus on the students rather than engaging in manufactured family drama. Excuse us. Donovan placed a protective hand on the small of my back, and we smoothly bypassed the reporter heading directly for the exit. We had to leave our own charity gala to prevent my parents from turning it into a tabloid spectacle. The ride home was tense. I pulled up the event coverage on my phone. Beatrice had given a masterclass in manipulation. She told the press that I had suffered a severe mental breakdown 8 years ago, framing my departure not as an escape from their racism and abuse, but as an irrational, tragic episode that had torn their family apart. She claimed that Donovan had taken advantage of my fragile state, isolating me from the people who loved me most. "We just want our daughter back," Beatrice was quoted as saying. "We just want to meet our grandson. We forgive her for turning her back on us when she came into money. We only pray she finds the stability she needs." It was brilliant evil and devastatingly effective. They were using my past struggles with anxiety against me, twisting my pain into a weapon to destroy my credibility. They were painting Donovan as a controlling opportunist, feeding into the exact same prejudices they had held against him from the start. This was no longer just a financial dispute. My family was trying to dismantle my reality. They were trying to convince the world that the life I had built was a symptom of a mental breakdown and that my husband was my captor. They were laying the groundwork for their threatened grandparents' rights lawsuit, building a public narrative that I was an unfit mother who was alienating her child from his loving extended family. I sat in the dark living room of our home, staring out the window at the rain. The anger I felt earlier in the week had hardened into something cold and absolute. Beatrice and Harrison thought they could control the narrative because they had always controlled the narrative. They thought they could bully me into silence because I had walked away quietly 8 years ago. They were about to find out that the woman they were attacking was not the broken girl they remembered. I was not going to let them destroy my husband's legacy, and I was absolutely not going to let them anywhere near my son. "We are not waiting for them to file that lawsuit," I told Donovan, my voice resolute, as he joined me by the window. "We are going to obliterate them. We are going to expose everything." Donovan nodded, a fierce determination in his eyes. "We start tomorrow." The smear campaign was designed to break us. Instead, it provided the exact clarity we needed. We were going to war, and we were going to use the one weapon my family could not defend against the absolute, undeniable truth. The tension in our household had reached a fever pitch following the release of the defamatory article. Donovan was working nearly around the clock, managing the board of directors and assuring our primary stakeholders that the intellectual property claims were entirely baseless. I was coordinating with our legal counsel and private security team, creating an absolute fortress around our family. We thought we had anticipated every angle of their attack. We were wrong. We had underestimated the sheer desperate narcissism of my mother. It was a crisp Friday evening, the air buzzing with the excited energy of the annual spring fundraiser at Leo's private elementary school. The event was held in the school's sprawling, beautifully manicured botanical gardens. It was an important night, heavily attended by the parents of Leo's classmates, many of whom were prominent figures in the local business and tech communities. Donovan and I had been looking forward to this event for weeks. We had even sponsored the primary silent auction, eager to contribute to the school's new science and technology wing. Leo was running around the perimeter of the gardens with his friends, his laughter carrying over the soft background music. Donovan was deep in a conversation with the school's headmaster near the catering tents. I was standing near a display of student artwork, holding a glass of sparkling water, finally feeling a rare moment of peace amidst the chaotic week. That peace shattered the moment I felt a sharp, aggressive tap on my shoulder. I turned around, the polite smile already forming on my face, expecting to greet another parent. Instead, I found myself staring directly into the furious, perfectly made-up face of my mother. Beatrice was not dressed in her usual understated country club attire. She was wearing a dramatic, deep burgundy gown, clearly intended to draw maximum attention. She stood with her posture rigidly upright, her eyes wide and flashing with a terrifying combination of manic energy and calculated victimhood. "Courtney," she gasped loudly, her voice projecting across the immediate area, instantly silencing the conversations of the parents standing nearby. "Thank God I found you." I froze, my blood turning to ice water in my veins. The sheer audacity of her presence was staggering. We had placed her on every security ban list we controlled, but the school fundraiser was an open-ticketed community event. She must have purchased a ticket anonymously or used one of her old society connections to bypass the guest list restrictions. "What are you doing here?" I demanded, my voice dropping to a harsh, lethal whisper, attempting to contain the situation before it exploded. "You are not welcome here, Beatrice. Leave immediately." I took a step toward her, intending to physically guide her toward the exit, but Beatrice expertly sidestepped me. She raised a hand to her mouth, letting out a sharp, theatrical sob that carried perfectly over the quiet classical music playing in the background. Heads began to turn. Parents holding wine glasses paused, their attention drawn to the sudden jarring display of emotion in the middle of the elegant garden party. "Please, Courtney," Beatrice cried, her voice trembling with manufactured agony. "I just want to see my grandson. I have not seen him since he was born. You have kept him hidden away from me for 5 long years. What kind of mother keeps a child away from his own grandmother?" The color drained from my face. She was not just causing a scene. She was performing. She was actively weaponizing her tears to publicly assassinate my character in front of my peers, my child's teachers, and the very community Donovan and I had worked so hard to support. She was building the narrative for her threatened grandparents' rights lawsuit right here on the school lawn. "Keep your voice down!" I hissed, stepping directly into her personal space to block her line of sight toward the children's play area. "You do not get to come here and play the victim. You disowned me. You never wanted to meet Leo. Now get out before I call security." Beatrice ignored my warning entirely. She leaned back, maximizing her visibility to the growing crowd of onlookers. Tears were now streaming freely down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. "Why are you doing this to our family?" she wailed, clutching her chest as if in physical pain. "Your father is sick. We are struggling. And you just turn your back on us because of your new money. Because your husband tells you to. We love you, Courtney. We have always loved you. Please just let me see my grandson. Just for a moment. Please do not be so cruel." The whispers began. I could hear the hushed, concerned voices of the other parents rippling through the crowd. They did not know the history. They did not know about the racist ultimatum 8 years ago, or the canceled health insurance, or the freezing apartment. They did not know about the $2 million extortion attempt, or the media smear campaign. All they saw was a heartbroken, wealthy-looking grandmother begging a seemingly cold, wealthy daughter for a simple moment with a child. I felt a surge of absolute blinding rage. She was using the exact same tactics that had worked for her in her country club circles for decades. She was creating a public spectacle so uncomfortable that the target would simply surrender to make the embarrassment stop. She expected me to cave under the weight of social pressure. She expected me to shrink to placate her, to agree to a meeting just to quiet the crowd. But I was no longer the girl she could bully. I did not shrink. I stood my ground, my posture as rigid and unyielding as steel. I looked her directly in the eye, refusing to break contact, refusing to show a single ounce of the vulnerability she was desperately trying to extract from me. "You have absolutely no right to that child," I stated, my voice echoing clearly and firmly across the sudden silence of the garden. "You made your choice 8 years ago when you looked at my husband and told me he would taint your family name. You do not get to erase a decade of racism and abuse just because you read our company's valuation in the newspaper." Beatrice gasped, a genuine look of shock flashing across her face as I publicly named her prejudice. She had not anticipated that I would expose the ugly truth behind her actions in front of her precious high society peers. "You are lying!" she sputtered, her voice losing its theatrical sorrow and pitching into shrill desperation. "You are unstable, Courtney. You are having an episode. Donovan has brainwashed you. Donovan appeared at my side at that exact moment. He moved with swift, silent authority, placing a strong, protective hand on my shoulder. His presence instantly shifted the dynamic of the confrontation. He did not engage with Beatrice. He did not yell. He simply looked past her, raising his hand to signal the two private security contractors we had stationed near the catering tents. "Remove this woman from the premises immediately." Donovan commanded, his voice carrying the absolute, uncompromising weight of a CEO accustomed to giving orders. "If she resists, contact local law enforcement and have her charged with trespassing and harassment." The security contractors moved in quickly, flanking Beatrice on both sides. She realized instantly that the performance was over. The crowd was not going to intervene. The school headmaster was already rushing over, looking deeply alarmed by the disturbance. Her attempt to manipulate the social environment had failed completely against Donovan's decisive action. "Do not touch me," Beatrice shrieked, batting away the hand of the security guard as they firmly guided her toward the exit gates. "You cannot do this. I am her mother. I have rights. You will hear from our lawyers. You hear me. You will pay for this." I stood beside Donovan, watching her being escorted out of the botanical gardens. Her screams faded into the distance, replaced by the awkward, strained silence of the remaining guests. The damage to the evening was done, but the damage to her strategy was far worse. She had tried to expose me as a monster, but instead she had revealed herself as an unhinged, hostile threat. The headmaster approached us, his face pale with concern. "Mr. and Mrs. Vance, I am so incredibly sorry. We had no idea she was not an authorized guest. We will handle the fallout with the school administration tomorrow," Donovan said smoothly, shaking the headmaster's hand to reassure him. "Please ensure our son is brought to our car immediately. We are leaving." The ride home was conducted in near total silence. Leo was safely buckled in his car seat, happily exhausted from playing with his friends, completely oblivious to the war that had just been fought a few yards away from him. I sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window at the passing streetlights, my hands trembling with residual adrenaline. The reality of the situation crashed over me with terrifying clarity. Beatrice had not just crossed a boundary, she had obliterated it. She had actively attempted to weaponize my child and my community against me. She had proven that there was no depth to which she would not sink, no lie she would not tell, and no public spectacle she would not create to force our compliance. Ignoring them was no longer a viable strategy. Blocking their numbers, increasing security, and rejecting their financial demands were purely defensive measures. And defense was clearly not enough. They viewed our silence as a weakness to be exploited. They viewed our distance as an obstacle to be smashed through. "They are actively trying to destroy us," I said, breaking the silence as we pulled into our secure driveway. "They will not stop, Donovan. They will keep leaking fake stories. They will keep filing frivolous lawsuits. They will keep showing up where Leo is. They want to burn our peace to the ground until we pay them to stop." Donovan parked the car in the garage and turned the engine off. He unbuckled his seatbelt, turning to face me in the dim light of the car interior. His expression was not angry, it was entirely lethally resolved. "Then we do not wait for them to burn our peace," Donovan said quietly. "We strike the match ourselves. We dismantle their power base completely. We take away everything they are using to threaten us." I nodded slowly, the fear evaporating, replaced by a cold, calculating determination. The rules of engagement had changed. My family wanted a public war over legacy and wealth. They had forced the issue by bringing their toxicity into my child's world. Now they were going to face the full, devastating force of the very daughter they had once thrown away. "We start tomorrow." I agreed, my voice hard as steel. "We hire the investigators. We open the books. We find out exactly how much debt Harrison Logistics is carrying. And then we ruin them." By 8 o'clock Monday morning, the defensive shields we had erected around our lives were officially repurposed into offensive artillery. Donovan did not just call a standard legal team, he called the absolute best corporate fixers on the West Coast. We assembled a strike team in the secure boardroom of Horizon Cyber, consisting of a top-tier forensic accountant named Elias and a ruthless private investigator named Vance. We slid the manila folder Beatrice had dropped in my foyer across the polished glass table. The folder contained the routing numbers and the basic corporate structuring of Harrison Logistics. It was all the starting material they needed. I want every single financial transaction, every shell company, every hidden debt, and every offshore account connected to Harrison Logistics laid bare. Donovan instructed, his voice echoing with absolute authority. I also want the exact IP address and financial trail of the anonymous source who leaked that defamatory story to the Business Journal. Spare absolutely no expense. Turn their entire existence inside out. Elias and Vance nodded, taking the folder with clinical precision. They were professionals who specialized in dismantling corporate facades. They did not ask about the family dynamics, they only cared about the data. And in my experience as a data architect, I knew that data never lied. For the next 2 weeks, an eerie silence settled over our personal lives. Beatrice did not attempt another public spectacle, presumably advised by her lawyers to maintain a low profile while prepping their frivolous grandparents' rights lawsuit. Cameron remained quiet, likely believing his coffee shop ambush and media leak had successfully backed us into a corner. They thought we were scrambling to defend Donovan's public offering. They had no idea we were quietly mapping the blueprints to their destruction. The waiting was agonizing but necessary. I poured my nervous energy into my work, burying myself in code and encryption protocols while Donovan expertly navigated the nervous investors who had been spooked by the media leak. We moved through our days with a shared, unspoken anticipation. We knew the hammer was going to fall. We just needed to know exactly how heavy it was. 14 days after we commissioned the investigation, Elias and Vance requested an emergency meeting. We gathered in the same secure boardroom, the heavy mahogany doors locked behind us. Elias connected his encrypted laptop to the main presentation screen, pulling up a series of financial flowcharts that looked like a complex, chaotic spiderweb. You were right to be suspicious of your brother's $2 million request. Elias began adjusting his glasses. Cameron told your husband that Harrison Logistics was struggling due to market overhead and supply chain issues. That was a complete fabrication. The market is not killing Harrison Logistics. Your family is killing it from the inside. Elias tapped his keyboard and the screen shifted to a consolidated balance sheet. The numbers glowing in harsh red ink took my breath away. Harrison and Beatrice were not just experiencing a temporary cash flow problem. They were standing on the edge of an absolute financial abyss. They are underwater by approximately $12 million, Elias stated flatly. Your father has leveraged absolutely everything to keep the company afloat. He took out a third mortgage on their gated estate. He liquidated his primary retirement portfolios. He even leveraged his shares in the country club. The company is surviving on high-interest short-term predatory loans. They are completely bankrupt in every sense of the word except the official filing. I stared at the screen in disbelief. $12 million in debt. The arrogant woman who had stood in my foyer looking down her nose at my husband and demanding we hand over our money was secretly drowning in financial ruin. The entire country club lifestyle, the designer dresses, the extravagant galas, it was all a crumbling facade built on toxic debt. And the media leak, Donovan asked, his eyes narrowing at the screen. Vance stepped forward, handing Donovan a thick physical dossier. Traced directly back to your brother. Cameron used a burner email account and routed it through a basic VPN, which took my team about 10 minutes to crack. He paid a disgruntled former intern from your company $5,000 in cryptocurrency to verify the fabricated story. We have the digital receipts, the blockchain trail, and a sworn signed affidavit from the intern, who was terrified the moment we threatened him with federal corporate espionage charges. The sheer incompetence of Cameron's plan was almost laughable. He had tried to play corporate saboteur and left a digital trail a mile wide, but the media leak was just the appetizer. Elias cleared his throat, drawing our attention back to the massive screens. The media leak was a desperate distraction, Elias explained. Cameron needed to force a quick cash settlement from you because he is the primary cause of the $12 million debt. Your brother is not just a terrible vice president of operations. He is an active, prolific embezzler. The room went completely still. I looked at Donovan, who leaned forward, his jaw tight. "Show us," Donovan commanded. Elias pulled up a secondary web of transactions highlighting dozens of offshore wire transfers. When Harrison gave Cameron executive control of the operational accounts 5 years ago, he handed him the keys to the vault. Cameron has a severe unchecked gambling addiction. We tracked his digital footprint across multiple high-stakes offshore betting syndicates, illicit cryptocurrency casinos, and private poker rings. He has been systematically siphoning operational funds from Harrison Logistics to cover his massive gambling losses. I felt a cold wave of nausea wash over me. 5 years ago. That was exactly when my parents had cut me off, telling me I was a worthless failure for marrying Donovan. While I was shivering in a studio apartment eating instant ramen, Cameron was given a six-figure salary and access to the family's corporate accounts. He had spent the last half-decade literally gambling away the family legacy. How did Harrison not notice, I asked, struggling to comprehend the magnitude of the fraud? My father is arrogant, but he is not stupid when it comes to accounting. You do not just miss millions of dollars draining from your operational budget. He did notice. Vance interjected, his tone grim. Our investigation indicates that Harrison discovered the embezzlement approximately 8 months ago. But instead of reporting his son to the authorities or the company's private investors, Harrison chose to cover it up. He initiated the predatory loans and remortgaged his personal estate to quietly replace the stolen funds and hide the fraud from the board. The depth of their hypocrisy was absolutely staggering. When I wanted to marry a good, honest, brilliant man, I was disowned, erased from the family, and thrown to the wolves. But when their golden child committed multiple federal financial crimes and robbed their company blind, they bankrupted themselves to protect him. They chose to risk prison and total financial ruin rather than admit that their perfect country club son was a degenerate criminal. That is why they came to you, Elias concluded, turning off the presentation. The $2 million Cameron asked for was the exact amount needed to cover a balloon payment on one of the predatory loans due at the end of this month. When you refused, Beatrice escalated to the grandparents' rights threat. They are terrified. If they default on that loan, the creditors will open the books, the embezzlement will be exposed, and Cameron will go to federal prison. They are trying to extort you to keep their son out of a jail cell. I sat back in my leather chair, the absolute silence of the boardroom buzzing in my ears. The puzzle was finally complete. Every arrogant demand, every racist insult, every public tear Beatrice shed at the school fundraiser, it was all a desperate, frantic performance to hide their catastrophic reality. They did not want my love. They did not want reconciliation. They just wanted my husband's money to clean up their golden child's criminal mess. I looked over at Donovan. His expression was completely composed, but his eyes were burning with a lethal, calculated intensity. He had always been a master of strategy, a man who saw the entire chessboard while his opponents were still looking at a single pawn. Elias, Donovan said quietly, his voice slicing through the stillness of the room. These predatory loans that Harrison took out to cover the embezzlement. Who currently holds the promissory notes? Elias flipped open a physical file on the table. A regional private equity firm called Apex Holdings. They specialize in distressed corporate debt. They hold the paper on the $12 million, including the $2 million balloon payment due in exactly 3 weeks. Donovan turned to me, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. It was the smile of a man who had just found the exact pressure point needed to bring an entire empire crashing down to the ground. Courtney, Donovan said softly, reaching out to cover my hand with his. How would you like to own Harrison Logistics? My heart skipped a beat as the sheer brilliance of his implication washed over me. We did not need to fight them in a messy, protracted defamation lawsuit. We did not need to engage in a public mudslinging match over grandparents' rights. We could dismantle them surgically, quietly, and completely. Are you suggesting we buy their debt? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, as the magnitude of the strategy settled in. I am suggesting we become their absolute worst nightmare, Donovan replied. They thought they could use our success as their personal bailout fund, Let us show them exactly what happens when you try to extort the people who hold the keys to your survival. I turned back to Elias and Vance, the residual shock entirely gone, replaced by a cold, unyielding resolve. My family had spent my entire life making me feel small, powerless, and unworthy. They had tried to destroy my husband. They had tried to weaponize my son. Contact Apex Holdings immediately, I instructed the investigators, my voice ringing with absolute authority. I want to acquire the entirety of Harrison Logistics' distressed debt. Use whatever shell companies or blind trusts you need to keep our names off the initial paperwork. I want to own every single dollar they owe. The investigative team nodded, packing up their files. The war was no longer being fought on my family's terms. We had just seized the high ground, and we were preparing to deliver the final crushing blow. With the investigators dispatched to execute the corporate buyout of my parents' debt, Donovan and I turned our attention to the second front of their attack. The defamatory article published in the Seattle Business Chronicle was still circulating rapidly, casting a long, toxic shadow over Horizon Cyber and deeply spooking our board members. Harrison and Cameron truly thought they were playing a brilliant high-level strategic game by leaking the fabricated story. They pushed the false narrative that Donovan had maliciously stolen proprietary supply chain data from Harrison Logistics during my brief employment there right out of college. They believed that by threatening Donovan's professional reputation and jeopardizing our public offering, they would force me to capitulate and hand over the $2 million they desperately needed to avoid federal prison. They genuinely thought I was just the founder's wife, a lucky passive passenger on a rocket ship my husband built, terrified of losing my newfound affluent lifestyle and willing to pay any ransom to keep the peace. But my family had made a fatal, unrecoverable miscalculation. They did not just underestimate the fierce loyalty and brilliance of my husband. They completely and utterly misunderstood my actual role in the corporate empire we had created together. I was never just a passenger. I was the engine. When my parents cut me off 8 years ago, they mocked my degree in data architecture. They laughed at my ambitions. They told their wealthy country club friends that I was throwing my life away to live in squalor with a man who would never amount to anything. What they did not know was that while we were freezing in that tiny, unheated studio apartment above the loud laundromat, I was not just cheering Donovan on from the sidelines. I was actively designing the entire relational database that made his software functional and revolutionary. Donovan is a brilliant, unparalleled coder, a visionary who can see the application of technology in ways no one else in the industry can. But a grand vision requires a solid foundation, and I built that foundation with my bare hands. The core predictive algorithm that took Horizon Cyber to a staggering $53 million public valuation was not stolen from a failing, mismanaged regional shipping company. It was written entirely by me, using a cheap refurbished laptop resting on a cardboard box that served as our dining table. I spent thousands of hours staring at glowing screens until my eyes ached, mapping out millions of data points and building complex schemas that would eventually revolutionize digital security for the banking sector. Every single time, my mother sent a cruel, condescending message through a mutual acquaintance every single time my father tried to financially suffocate us by blacklisting Donovan from local contracting jobs. I channeled that burning pain directly into the code. I used their vicious rejection as the ultimate, inexhaustible fuel. I was fiercely determined to create a system so flawless, so resilient, and so indispensable that the entire tech world would have to bow to it. Harrison Logistics was a dinosaur, a crumbling, inefficient relic of an outdated business model run by arrogant men who barely understood how to use a spreadsheet. The idea that their messy, unorganized shipping records could somehow be the secret ingredient to an advanced machine learning cybersecurity software was downright laughable. But the press did not know that, and the public always loved a sensational scandal involving new money. I knew we had to correct the narrative immediately, but we were going to do it in a way that left my family absolutely no room to retreat, no room to negotiate, and no room to survive the fallout. The truth of our company's origins was a closely guarded secret born out of pure survival instinct and a harsh, pragmatic understanding of the technology industry. When we first started pitching our cybersecurity software to venture capitalists, we faced a brutal and undeniable reality. The investment world is notoriously prejudiced, dominated by gatekeepers who protect their own. We walked into pristine glass conference rooms and faced long tables full of older, wealthy men who looked and acted exactly like my father. They took one look at Donovan, a brilliant black developer without a legacy pedigree, and me, a young female data architect, and they immediately dismissed our potential. The sexism and racism were not always overt, but they were deeply woven into every condescending question, every insulting lowball valuation, and every swift rejection. We quickly realized that the system was rigidly rigged against us. If we presented ourselves as equal co-founders, we would spend our entire careers fighting simply to prove our basic competency, wasting valuable energy defending our right to be in the room. We needed to protect the technology from predators, and we needed to protect our future from the systemic biases that sought to hold us down. So we made a highly strategic, incredibly difficult decision. We decided that Donovan would become the sole public face of Horizon Cyber. He had the charisma, the commanding presence, and the sheer undeniable force of will to force those venture capitalists to sit down and listen. He officially became the chief executive officer, the sole founder, the man shaking hands, closing deals, and giving interviews to the financial press. Meanwhile, I deliberately stepped into the shadows. I became the silent, invisible architect. I scrubbed my name from all public-facing corporate documents and actively erased my digital footprint from the company's founding story. To the outside world, I was exactly what my family assumed. I was a supportive, quiet wife who occasionally attended corporate charity galas and raised our son. But inside the secure, windowless walls of our development lab, I was the one writing the advanced encryption protocols. I was the one mapping the intricate neural networks that allowed our software to accurately predict and completely neutralize sophisticated cyber threats before they ever breached a client's system. I willingly gave up the public glory, the immediate recognition, and the ego stroke of being named a tech founder because I knew the truth. I knew that owning the actual technology controlling the foundational code was infinitely more powerful than having my name printed on a glossy magazine cover. True power does not need to announce itself at a cocktail party. True power operates quietly behind the scenes, holding the strings that control the entire operation without ever needing to demand applause. I watched Donovan take the stage at tech conferences, delivering flawless presentations that secured our funding, knowing that every time he answered a complex technical question, he was pulling from the architecture I had mapped out on our living room floor. It was the perfect symbiotic partnership, a flawless execution of strategy that shielded our company from the systemic bigotry that would have otherwise crushed it in its infancy. We played the game by their rules just long enough to acquire the resources we needed, and then we quietly rewrote the entire rulebook to secure our absolute independence. That immense power was legally cemented 3 years ago, long before we ever considered going public. As the software evolved from a promising startup concept into an enterprise-grade security system utilized by major financial institutions, Donovan, and our primary legal counsel, insisted on securing the intellectual property in the most bulletproof manner possible. They knew the exact staggering value of what I had built, and they knew we had to protect it from hostile takeovers. We established a highly secure, irrevocable blind trust managed by a team of elite attorneys. Through that anonymous trust, I filed for and was officially granted the master patent for the core predictive algorithm that ran every single product Horizon Cyber sold on the open market. I am the sole, indisputable legal owner of the proprietary technology. Horizon Cyber does not own the code. They simply license the use of my algorithm through an exclusive, ironclad corporate contract that generates massive royalties directly into my private accounts. This meant that the media smear campaign my father and brother had just launched to destroy us was not just a desperate, pathetic lie. It was legally, factually, and mathematically impossible. Cameron had paid a disgruntled former intern to claim Donovan stole supply chain data to build his software. But Donovan does not even own the core technology. I do. If my father Harrison wanted to officially claim intellectual property theft, he would have to formally sue the blind trust, which would immediately publicly reveal that his own disowned daughter held the master patent. He would have to stand in front of a federal judge under oath and explain how a failing logistics company that was $12 million in debt somehow invented a revolutionary cybersecurity algorithm that they then allowed a 25-year-old human resources employee to walk out the front door with. It was a complete devastating checkmate. My family, in their desperate attempt to extort money and destroy my husband's reputation, had handed us the exact weapon we needed to destroy their credibility forever. They thought they were cornering a vulnerable tech CEO. Instead, they had walked blindly into a trap meticulously laid by the very daughter they had cast aside. They had handed me the power to not only clear Donovan's name, but to publicly expose their fraud. I looked at the patent documents secured in our home safe, tracing the raised seal with my fingertips. The 8 years of silence, the insults, the threats, and the painful estrangement had all led to this exact moment. Beatrice and Harrison wanted to play a high-stakes game, with our lives, believing they held all the leverage. But I held the patent, I held their debt, and I held their absolute destruction in the palm of my hand. The stage was set for their final, inevitable downfall, and they had absolutely no idea the avalanche that was about to hit them. They had spent my entire life underestimating my intelligence, assuming my quiet nature was a sign of weakness. They mistook my compliance for stupidity. But while they were busy maintaining their shallow social appearances and gambling away their corporate assets, I had evolved into the architect of their demise. I did not just hold the patent. I held the undeniable proof that my family's entire existence was a carefully constructed, desperately fragile lie. The smear campaign was the last desperate gasp of a dying dynasty, and I was holding the pillow. 6 months ago, long before Beatrice ever showed up on my front porch, with her ridiculous demands, Donovan and I were already looking closely at the shifting landscape of the regional shipping industry. Horizon Cyber was preparing for our initial public offering, and our financial advisors highly recommended diversifying our corporate portfolio to ensure long-term market stability. Donovan, always the visionary, identified a massive vulnerability in the outdated infrastructure of mid-tier logistics firms. These companies were bleeding capital because they stubbornly refused to modernize their predictive routing systems, making them highly susceptible to market fluctuations and severe cyber vulnerabilities. We recognized a strategic market opportunity that was simply too lucrative to ignore. Instead of merely selling our enterprise software to these failing companies, we decided to quietly acquire their distressed corporate debt. We utilized a dedicated portion of our pre-IPO capital to establish a subsidiary LLC, a completely legal and highly effective corporate vehicle designed specifically to purchase promissory notes from over-leveraged regional businesses. We called the holding company Apex Holdings. The strategy was brilliant in its ruthless simplicity. By purchasing the debt at a fraction of its original value from panicked creditors, we positioned ourselves to either restructure the failing companies using our advanced software or liquidate their physical assets for a massive profit. It was a standard aggressive private equity maneuver. But for me, the acquisition strategy quickly became deeply personal. While our financial team was evaluating a dozen different struggling shipping companies across the Pacific Northwest, one particular corporate file landed on my desk that made my blood run cold. It was the comprehensive financial dossier for Harrison Logistics. Seeing my father's company listed among the most distressed high-risk assets on the open market was a surreal experience. The financial autopsy was laid bare before me, revealing the staggering extent of his mismanagement and Cameron's criminal embezzlement. Harrison had leveraged absolutely everything he owned, taking out desperate high-interest loans from predatory lenders just to keep the lights on and the facade of his wealth intact. I did not just casually review the file, I devoured it. I scrutinized every single line item, every panicked transfer, and every desperate signature my father had put to paper. I saw the exact dates when he secretly remortgaged the family estate, securing loans against the very house where I had grown up. I saw the exorbitant interest rates he had agreed to, terms so brutal that no competent businessman would ever accept them unless he was staring down the barrel of federal prison. Harrison thought he was dealing with ruthless, faceless corporate sharks who only cared about quarterly returns. He had absolutely no idea that the predator circling his bleeding company was the daughter he had discarded 8 years prior. When the time came to officially acquire the debt portfolios, Donovan and I made a highly specific surgical adjustment to our corporate structure. We deliberately separated the Harrison Logistics acquisition from the Main Horizon cyber umbrella. I used my own personal capital generated directly from the licensing royalties of my master patent to take sole individual ownership of Apex Holdings. I did not want this to be a corporate victory for my husband's company. I wanted it to be my own personal triumph. I legally and quietly became the absolute owner of the holding company that purchased my family's financial obligations. The trap was set with meticulous precision. Through Apex Holdings, I purchased the entirety of the $12 million debt my father had recklessly accumulated. I bought the commercial loans backing his fleet of delivery trucks. I bought the operational credit lines he used to pay his increasingly nervous employees. Most importantly, I bought the deeply toxic promissory notes that carried the catastrophic $2 million balloon payment due at the end of the month. I held the paper on every single financial maneuver Harrison had made to cover up Cameron's rampant embezzlement. The irony was sharp and incredibly sweet. My parents had spent my entire life wielding their wealth like a weapon, using their money to control, manipulate, and punish anyone who stepped out of line. They had cut off my college tuition, canceled my health insurance, and thrown me into the street to prove that I could not survive without their financial grace. They had built their entire identity around the prestige of their country club status and the power of their bank accounts. Now, through my own hard work, resilience, and strategic planning, I had literally bought their entire existence. I was the primary creditor of the Harrison family. I owned them. But the absolute masterpiece of this financial checkmate was not just the corporate debt. When Harrison became desperate to hide his son's crimes, he had personally guaranteed the corporate loans. He had used his private assets as collateral to secure the cash needed to replace the stolen funds. As I reviewed the final acquisition documents for Apex Holdings, I held the physical deeds in my hands. I owned the third mortgage on the sprawling gated suburban mansion where Beatrice hosted her pretentious charity luncheons. I owned the lien on the luxury vehicles they drove. I even held the debt secured against their exclusive generational memberships at the elite country club they had claimed Donovan would taint. Without my parents knowing, I had become the invisible warden of their financial prison. Every time Beatrice swiped a credit card to buy a designer dress to maintain her wealthy facade, she was spending borrowed money that she legally owed to me. Every time Cameron walked into his corner office and put his feet up on his mahogany desk, he was sitting in a building that belonged to his estranged sister. Every time Harrison sat in his leather chair, desperately trying to figure out how to stop the bleeding, he was working for my holding company. They were completely surrounded, locked in a financial cage of their own making, and I held the only key. This was the true reason Cameron had shown up at the coffee shop begging Donovan for a $2 million seed injection. He was not looking for a partnership. He was completely terrified because he knew the balloon payment was due, and he knew that defaulting on that specific note would trigger a devastating audit. Apex Holdings had the legal right to demand a full forensic accounting of Harrison Logistics the moment they missed that payment. Cameron knew that an audit would instantly expose his offshore gambling syndicates and his 5 years of systematic theft. He was begging Donovan for the exact amount of money needed to pay me. The beautiful poetic justice of the situation was almost overwhelming. They thought they were playing a brilliant game of manipulation by threatening us with a grandparents' rights lawsuit. They thought leaking a fake story to the Business Journal about stolen intellectual property would force Donovan to settle out of court and hand over the cash they desperately needed. They believed their aggressive bullying tactics would break us, just like they had broken so many of their business competitors in the past. But their threats were entirely toothless. You cannot extort the person who already owns the bank. I kept the Apex Holdings documentation securely locked in the heavy steel safe in Donovan's home office, right next to the master patent for our cybersecurity algorithm. These documents were not just pieces of paper. They were the ultimate instruments of accountability. My family had demanded that I earn my place at their table. They had insisted that I prove my loyalty by opening my husband's checkbook and saving their sinking ship. They were about to learn that I had no interest in sitting at their table because I had already bought the entire dining room the house it sat in and the ground it was built on. The smear campaign against Donovan continued to generate noisy, irritating headlines in the local press, but inside our home, the atmosphere was completely serene. We were no longer reacting to their attacks. We were simply waiting for the clock to run out. The balloon payment was due in exactly 10 days. We knew Harrison and Beatrice were running out of time, running out of options, and running out of sanity. They were backed into a corner, which meant they were about to make a massive, desperate public mistake. My family always retreated to their social standing when they felt threatened. They used high society events as a shield, believing that projecting an image of untouchable wealth would somehow manifest reality. I knew exactly what their next move would be. They would host an extravagant, highly publicized event to prove to their creditors and their peers that the Harrison legacy was as strong as ever. They would try to force a public reconciliation, trapping me in a room full of cameras and local elites, betting that my social anxiety and desire for decorum would force me to smile, play the dutiful daughter, and sign a check to save them from embarrassment. They were setting a grand, glittering stage for their final manipulation. They had absolutely no idea that I was going to use that exact same stage to burn their empire to the ground. The invitation arrived by specialized courier 5 days before the balloon payment was due on their catastrophic debt. It was printed on heavy cream-colored cardstock, with gold-embossed lettering announcing the annual Harrison Logistics Spring Gala. The venue was the grand ballroom of the exact same elite country club that held the mortgage I now personally owned. The sheer blinding audacity of it was almost poetic. Harrison and Beatrice were completely bankrupt, staring down the barrel of federal fraud charges and total liquidation, yet they had maxed out whatever secret credit lines they had left to throw a six-figure party. They had hired a live symphony orchestra, ordered imported floral arrangements, and arranged for a 5-course catered dinner. They were bleeding out, but they insisted on bleeding out in black tie. Donovan and I knew exactly what this was. It was not a celebration of corporate success. It was a highly calculated, desperate trap. According to our security team, Beatrice had personally invited several prominent journalists from the local business journals and lifestyle magazines. Harrison had invited his remaining nervous investors and a handful of local politicians. They were setting a massive public stage. Their strategy was painfully transparent. They planned to publicly ambush us using the heavy presence of the media and high society elites to force a grand reconciliation. They believed that if they cornered us in front of the flashing cameras, my social anxiety and Donovan's desire to protect his newly public company's stock price would compel us to play along. They expected me to smile, hug my mother for the photographers, and quietly sign over a $2 million check to avoid a scandalous public scene. They thought the pressure of the spotlight would break us into submission. They could not have been more wrong. We did not decline the invitation. We RSVP'd for a table right at the front. The night of the gala, I stood in front of the full-length mirror in our bedroom preparing for battle. I did not dress like a daughter seeking approval. I dressed like the architect of a $53 million empire. I wore a floor-length emerald green gown with sharp, structured lines that projected absolute authority. Donovan stood beside me wearing a bespoke tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. We did not look like victims of a smear campaign. We looked like royalty. We looked like the people who owned the building. When our hired town car pulled up to the valet stand of the country club, a flurry of camera flashes immediately erupted. The local press, hungry for drama following the leaked fake stories about our company, surged forward against the velvet ropes. Donovan stepped out first, ignoring the shouted questions from reporters. He turned and offered me his hand. I stepped out of the car, keeping my posture perfectly straight, my expression an impenetrable mask of serene confidence. I did not look away from the cameras. I looked directly into them. As we walked through the heavy double doors and stepped into the grand ballroom, the ambient noise of clinking crystal and wealthy chatter instantly dropped by half. Hundreds of eyes turned to watch our arrival. The tension in the room was palpable, thick with the whispered rumors my parents had meticulously planted over the last few weeks. People were staring at Donovan, wondering if he really was the corporate thief my brother had painted him to be. They were staring at me, wondering if I was the unstable, vindictive daughter Beatrice had described in her tearful interviews. We did not shrink under their collective gaze. We glided across the imported marble floor with absolute chilling calm. Across the room, I spotted my family. Cameron was standing near the bar, his face glistening with a nervous sweat that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. He gripped his scotch glass so tightly his knuckles were white. Harrison stood near the center tables, his usual arrogant posture looking strained and hollow, like a man waiting for an executioner. And then there was Beatrice. My mother was holding court near the media section, wearing a diamond necklace that she had undoubtedly bought on credit just for this occasion. When she saw us walking toward our assigned table, a predatory, triumphant gleam flashed in her eyes. She genuinely believed her trap had worked. She thought our presence meant we had surrendered, that we had come to pay the ransom and save our public image. She immediately signaled to the photographers, ensuring their lenses were pointed directly at us as we took our seats. The first hour of this gala was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Donovan and I sat at our table sipping sparkling water and engaging in polite, relaxed conversation with the confused executives seated next to us. We acted as if we did not have a single care in the world. We ignored the hostile glares from Cameron and the desperate, calculating glances from Harrison. We let the tension stretch and build until it was almost suffocating. My family was waiting for us to initiate contact, to come crawling to their head table and beg for a private word to negotiate the settlement. We simply ate our appetizers and smiled. By the time the main course was cleared, the desperation radiating from my parents was a tangible force in the room. The balloon payment was due in exactly 48 hours. They needed the check tonight. The press was waiting for the highly anticipated family reunion they had been promised. Seeing that we were absolutely refusing to play the role of the compliant, embarrassed children, Beatrice decided it was time to force our hand publicly. She was going to spring the trap herself. The lights in the grand ballroom dimmed slightly as a bright spotlight illuminated the main stage. The symphony orchestra faded out, and the room fell completely silent. Beatrice walked up the steps to the stage, her designer gown shimmering under the bright light. She stepped up to the microphone, adjusting it with a practiced, dramatic sigh. She looked out over the crowd, her gaze lingering intentionally on the reporters standing at the back of the room, before turning her eyes directly onto me. "Good evening, everyone," Beatrice began, her voice echoing through the massive room, thick with manufactured emotion. "Thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate the continued success and legacy of Harrison Logistics. But tonight is about more than just business. Tonight is about family. And as many of you know, our family has endured a painful, difficult season." She paused, reaching up to gently dab the corner of her eye, careful not to smudge her expensive makeup. The performance was sickeningly perfect. She was playing the martyred matriarch to absolute perfection. "For the past 8 years, my husband and I have carried a heavy burden," Beatrice continued, her voice trembling with fake sorrow. "We experienced a terrible rift with our beloved daughter Courtney. Mistakes were made on all sides. Words were spoken in anger. We gave her space, praying every single day that she would find her way back home. And recently there have been misunderstandings. There have been harsh words in the press. But family is thicker than any corporate dispute or temporary anger. She took a deep, shuddering breath, projecting her voice to ensure the cameras caught every single syllable. "Courtney, darling," Beatrice said, looking right at me, holding out her arms in an open gesture of welcoming grace. "Your father and I want to publicly say that we forgive you. We forgive you for walking away. We forgive the harsh words. We know you have been struggling, and we want you to know that our door is always open. You do not have to carry your burdens alone anymore. We are here to help you manage your new life, and we are here to support you." The crowd murmured in collective sympathy. Several older women at neighboring tables looked at me with expectation, waiting for me to break down in tears and run to the stage. But Beatrice was not finished. She had to deliver the final condescending insult designed to put Donovan in his place and establish her absolute dominance over our finances. "And Donovan," Beatrice said, turning her gaze to my husband, forcing a tight, patronizing smile, "we know our relationship had a rocky start. We did not understand your background, and you did not understand our world. But you are part of Courtney's life now, and we are willing to welcome you into the fold. We are willing to overlook the recent unpleasantness and bring you to the family table. Let us heal this divide tonight. Let us move forward together as one united, prosperous family." She lowered her arms, looking down at us with a smug, victorious expression disguised as maternal love. The room erupted into polite applause. The photographers raised their cameras, waiting for the heartwarming moment of reconciliation. Beatrice had played her ultimate card. She had publicly forgiven her wayward, struggling daughter and generously offered to guide her inexperienced husband. She expected me to feel so humiliated, so pressured by the sheer weight of public opinion, that I would accept her false olive branch and pay the $2 million to secure my newly restored status. I sat perfectly still, listening to the applause fade away. I looked at Donovan. He did not look angry. He simply raised his glass of sparkling water to me in a silent, supportive toast. The trap had been fully sprung, the audience was watching, and my mother had just handed me the absolute perfect opening. I placed my napkin on the table and slowly stood up. I smoothed the skirt of my emerald gown, my heart beating with cold, rhythmic precision. I was not going to run to the stage for a tearful hug. I was going to take the microphone and end the Harrison dynasty permanently. I walked toward the stage with measured, deliberate steps. The heavy silk of my emerald green gown brushed against the polished marble floor, the only sound I focused on as the massive ballroom held its collective breath. Photographers immediately scrambled to clear a path, their camera lenses tracking my every move with predatory excitement. Beatrice watched me approach, her rigid, practiced smile faltering for a fraction of a second before she forced it even wider. She extended her arms again, fully expecting me to step directly into her manufactured embrace, break down into tears, and weep into her shoulder for the cameras. I stopped 2 feet away from her. I did not reach out. I simply extended my hand toward the microphone she was gripping so desperately. "Thank you, Beatrice," I said, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any warmth. "I will take it from here." She blinked, visibly startled by the cold use of her first name. Her manicured fingers tightened instinctively around the stem of the microphone, a subconscious refusal to relinquish control of her perfect narrative. But I did not pull or fight her for it. I just stared directly into her eyes, with a cold, hollow intensity that made her instinctively recoil. Trembling slightly, she released the microphone. I turned to face the crowd, leaving my mother standing awkwardly slightly behind me, her arms falling uselessly to her sides. "Good evening," I said, my voice projecting crisp and clear across the silent, expectant, grand ballroom. "My mother has just told you a beautiful, deeply touching story about family forgiveness and healing a tragic divide. It was an incredible performance, but the fundamental problem with performances is that they require a willing audience, and they require the actors to forget the reality of what actually happened." I looked out over the sea of faces. The wealthy elite of Seattle, the nervous investors of Harrison Logistics, and the hungry local press. They were all entirely captivated, expecting a heartwarming reunion that would grace the society pages tomorrow morning. Beatrice claims that my departure from this family was a simple misunderstanding. I continued pacing slowly across the front of the stage, maintaining absolute command of the room. She claims she and Harrison gave me space to heal from a supposed mental breakdown. She stood up here and generously offered to forgive me for abandoning my family when I married my husband. She offered to welcome us into the fold to protect our new wealth and to guide our inexperienced hands. I paused, letting the silence stretch tightly across the room until it was almost uncomfortable. But my husband and I do not need your forgiveness, Beatrice, and we absolutely do not need your protection. I raised my left hand, giving a subtle prearranged signal to Donovan, who was still seated calmly at our front row table. He did not break eye contact with my father as he casually tapped the screen of his tablet. Immediately, the massive state-of-the-art presentation screens flanking the main stage flickered. The looping, elegant slideshow of Harrison Logistics corporate branding vanished. The screens went entirely black for one agonizing second before bursting back to life in harsh, glaring white light. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. My father Harrison lurched forward from his table, his face turning an alarming shade of purple. Cameron dropped his Scotch glass. It shattered loudly against the marble floor, but nobody looked down. Every single eye in the room was locked onto the massive screens behind me. Let us talk about why I actually left this family 8 years ago, I announced, my voice cutting through the rising murmurs like a surgical scalpel. On the screens behind me, high-resolution images of email threads were projected for the entire country club to read. The text was magnified, the dates, timestamps, and email addresses explicitly visible. They were the vicious, unvarnished emails Beatrice and Harrison had sent to their lawyers, their country club friends, and to me directly, the week before my wedding. I was not suffering from a mental breakdown, I stated, gesturing to the glowing screens. I was given a toxic ultimatum. My parents told me that if I married Donovan, a brilliant self-made black man who did not come from inherited trust fund money, I would be permanently erased from this family. I read the words directly off the screen, making sure every vile syllable echoed in the grand ballroom. Quote, "We will not allow our immaculate social standing to be tainted by a man of his nature. He is not one of us. If you walk down that aisle with him, you are dead to us." End quote. The silence in the room was no longer expectant. It was horrified. The high society peers Beatrice had spent decades trying to impress were staring at the screens in absolute disgust. The coded racism she had hidden behind polite country club smiles and charitable donations was now blasted in 20-foot letters across the walls. I heard a reporter in the back row frantically typing on a laptop, capturing the exact quotes. There was no mutual cooling-off period. I continued, stepping closer to the edge of the stage. My father instantly froze my bank accounts. He canceled my health insurance. They made sure I was left with absolutely nothing, fully expecting the harsh reality of poverty to break my spirit, so I would come crawling back in submission. They did not want to protect me. They wanted to brutally punish me for loving a man they deemed socially and racially unacceptable. Beatrice let out a strangled, panicked noise behind me. "Courtney, stop it right now," she hissed, stepping forward to grab my arm and rip the microphone away. I did not even look at her. I simply shifted my weight out of her reach. "Do not touch me." "But the racism and the disownment are just the prologue to tonight's event," I said, addressing the shocked crowd again. "Let us talk about why my parents suddenly decided to play the loving, forgiving family tonight. Let us talk about why they crashed my son's school fundraiser to create a public spectacle, and why my brother Cameron ambushed my husband to beg for a $2 million investment." I nodded to Donovan. The screens shifted instantly. The racist emails disappeared, replaced by the dense, red-lined financial flowcharts, bank statements, and consolidated balance sheets compiled by our forensic accountants. Harrison Logistics is not looking for strategic partners to expand their infrastructure. I revealed, watching the color drain completely from my father's face as his deepest secrets were laid bare. They are currently carrying $12 million in unsecured high-interest predatory debt. They are weeks away from total unrecoverable liquidation. The investors seated near Harrison began to shout, jumping out of their chairs in outrage. They had been lied to. The facade of corporate stability was being dismantled in real time, projected for the financial press to document. "And why are they drowning in toxic debt?" I asked, my voice rising over the escalating chaos. Because 5 years ago, Harrison handed the operational keys to his golden child, my brother Cameron. And Cameron used those operational accounts to fund a massive unchecked offshore gambling addiction. The screens shifted again, displaying the undeniable digital receipts, the blockchain trails, and the wire transfers moving millions of dollars from Harrison Logistics directly into illicit offshore betting syndicates and high-stakes poker rings. Cameron embezzled from his own company, I stated, pointing directly at my brother, who looked like he was about to pass out. He stole millions from his own investors. And when Harrison found out 8 months ago, instead of reporting his son to the authorities, he actively covered it up. He remortgaged his personal estate and took out catastrophic loans to hide the fraud from the very investors sitting in this room tonight. Total pandemonium erupted. An investor lunged toward Harrison, demanding his money back, only to be held back by country club security guards. Reporters were shouting rapid-fire questions, camera flashes blinding the front of the room in a strobe light effect. My mother was sobbing hysterically, her hands covering her face, her carefully constructed world burning to absolute ash around her. "But there is one final piece of business we need to address," I said, projecting my voice to its maximum volume to cut through the shouting and outrage. "My family brought me here tonight to pressure me into paying their $2 million balloon payment. They thought they could use this media presence to bully me into bailing them out of federal fraud charges to save face." I signaled Donovan one last time. The screens flashed to the final set of documents, the official corporate acquisition papers for Apex Holdings. The signatures at the bottom of the page were magnified. My signatures. "You see, Harrison," I said, turning to look directly at my father, who was staring at the screens in absolute paralyzed terror. "When you went looking for predatory lenders to cover your son's criminal tracks, you did not do your due diligence. You blindly sold your corporate debt to a private equity firm called Apex Holdings. What you did not know is that Apex Holdings is a subsidiary holding company." I let the realization hang in the air for a brutal, agonizing second. "I own Apex Holdings," I declared, my voice ringing with total, uncompromising authority. "I am the sole proprietor. I used the licensing royalties from the proprietary algorithm I personally engineered, the exact same algorithm you falsely claimed my husband stole to buy your debt." The sheer shock in the room silenced the shouting. The investors, the reporters, and my family stared at me in open-mouthed awe. "I own the $12 million you owe," I told my father, locking eyes with him as he visibly trembled under the weight of his ruin. "I own the commercial loans on your delivery fleet. I own the third mortgage on your gated estate. I even own the lien on your country club memberships. You brought me here to extort me, but you failed to realize you invited your primary creditor to your party." Beatrice let out a loud, genuine wail of despair, collapsing to her knees on the stage. She finally understood that they were not just exposed, they were completely destroyed. They had absolutely nothing left. "I do not forgive you," I said directly into the microphone, my tone ice-cold and utterly final. "I am not returning to your family. I am calling in the loans immediately, all of them. By Monday morning, Harrison Logistics will be fully liquidated and Cameron will be facing federal embezzlement charges." I lowered the microphone, the feedback whining sharply through the heavy speakers. I set it down gently on the edge of the stage, leaving Beatrice weeping on the floor behind me. I walked down the steps, my head held high, and took Donovan's offered hand. We did not look back as we walked out of the grand ballroom, leaving the ashes of the Harrison dynasty smoking in our wake. As the heavy oak doors of the country club swung shut behind us, cutting off the chaotic symphony of shouting investors and weeping, the crisp night air hit my face. It felt like breathing for the very first time in my life. We handed our ticket to the valet, who stared at us with wide, terrified eyes, having clearly heard the massive commotion echoing from the grand ballroom. Inside the venue, the social execution I had just delivered was taking immediate, devastating effect. According to our private security team, who remained behind to monitor the situation, the exodus from the gala was instantaneous and brutal. The high society peers. Beatrice had spent her entire adult life groveling to impress, did not offer a single shred of sympathy to her weeping on the floor. Instead, they physically backed away from my parents, treating them like a highly contagious disease. No one wanted to be photographed standing near a family about to be indicted for federal corporate fraud. The wealthy investors who had been sipping vintage champagne minutes prior were now violently demanding their coats, loudly instructing their own legal counsels on their cell phones to freeze any assets tied to Harrison Logistics. Cameron tried to slip out the side exit near the kitchens to escape the incoming media swarm, but the country club security, realizing the Harrisons no longer had the funds to pay for the six-figure gala, physically detained him until local authorities arrived to investigate the disturbance. The glorious, untouchable Harrison dynasty collapsed into complete social and financial ruin before the dessert course was even served. When Monday morning arrived, I did not hesitate for a single second. I sat at the massive desk in my home office, flanked by Donovan and our ruthless legal team, and formally signed the execution orders. Through Apex Holdings, I officially called in every single cent of the $12 million debt. The fallout was clinical, rapid, and absolutely merciless. Because Harrison had leveraged his personal assets to cover Cameron's massive embezzlement, the liquidation process stripped them of absolutely everything they owned. Harrison Logistics was immediately shuttered, its physical assets seized and sold off to satisfy the margins. The bank foreclosed on their sprawling suburban estate by Wednesday morning. The luxury vehicles were repossessed right out of their driveway, while local news helicopters circled overhead. The elite country club, horrified by the public spectacle and the criminal implications, permanently revoked their memberships and banned them from the premises. In less than a week, my parents were forced to pack whatever clothes they could fit into a few suitcases and move into a cramped, rundown apartment on the industrial outskirts of the city. Cameron was arrested by federal agents on Thursday morning, charged with multiple counts of wire fraud and corporate embezzlement. There was no high-priced defense attorney to bail him out this time because his parents no longer had a single dime to their names. 5 days after the gala, the storm had finally passed, leaving a beautiful, quiet clarity in its wake. I was sitting at the kitchen island reviewing the latest data architecture metrics for our next software patch when my cell phone vibrated against the marble counter. The screen displayed an unknown number. Our security protocols usually filtered these out automatically, but I felt a strange intuitive pull. I pressed accept and raised the phone to my ear. I did not say hello. I just waited in complete silence. Courtney. The voice on the other end was fractured, weak, and utterly pathetic. It was Beatrice. The arrogant, commanding tone that had defined my entire existence was completely gone, replaced by the trembling, raspy breath of a woman who had finally hit absolute rock bottom. I could hear the tinny hum of traffic and wailing sirens in the background, a stark contrast to the insulated, manicured quiet of the estate she used to command. "Courtney, please do not hang up. Please," Beatrice begged, her voice cracking into a desperate, wretched sob. "We have nothing. The bank took the house. They took everything. Your father is having chest pains and we cannot afford his specialist. Cameron is in a holding cell and they are setting his bail at $1 million. We are sleeping on a horrible mattress in an apartment that smells like mildew. You have to help us. You made your point. You won. Please, you have to stop this." I listened to her weep, analyzing the complete absence of any actual apology in her frantic plea. Even now, stripped of her wealth and her dignity, she was not apologizing for the racism, the abuse, or the extortion attempt. She was only crying because she was experiencing the severe consequences of her own actions. She was crying because she was cold and uncomfortable, experiencing the exact same reality she had forced upon me 8 years ago, when she threw me out to freeze in a studio apartment. She still believed that her discomfort was the only tragedy that mattered. "You have $53 million. Beatrice pleaded, her desperation turning frantic and breathless. "You own our debt. You can just cancel it. You can make this go away with the stroke of a pen. Please, Courtney, we are your family. You cannot just leave us here to rot in this place. You cannot do this to your own blood." I felt a profound, absolute stillness settle into my bones. I was not angry anymore. I was not sad. I was simply finished. I looked out the kitchen window, watching Donovan push our son on the wooden swing set we had built together in the backyard. I saw the pure, unadulterated joy on Leo's face. I saw the fierce, protective love in my husband's eyes. That was my family, that was my blood. Beatrice, I said, my voice dropping to a perfectly calm, icy register that carried absolute authority. I want you to listen to me very carefully. Her sobbing hitched a desperate silence falling over the line as she waited for the financial salvation she still arrogantly believed she was entitled to. I will not allow my immaculate life to be tainted by people of your nature, I stated, reciting the exact hateful words she had written in her email to me 8 years ago, twisting them to deliver the final lethal blow. You are not one of us. You are dead to me. I did not wait to hear her gasp. I did not wait for the inevitable scream of outrage or the fresh wave of manipulative tears. I pulled the phone away from my ear, ended the call, and permanently blocked the number. I contacted our private security team and ensured that every possible avenue of contact they could ever use again was permanently severed. I set the phone face down on the counter and took a deep, cleansing breath. The phantom weight I had been carrying on my shoulders for my entire life evaporated instantly. The final tie was severed. The toxic bloodline was officially broken. I walked away from the kitchen counter and stepped out through the sliding glass doors into the warm late afternoon sunlight of our backyard. The air smelled of blooming jasmine and fresh rain. Donovan looked up as he heard the screen door closing. He caught my eye pausing his game with Leo and raised a silent, questioning eyebrow. I simply smiled and gave him a single definitive nod. A slow, beautiful smile spread across his face, radiating absolute relief and complete victory. The war was officially over and our fortress remained completely impenetrable. Leo came running across the manicured grass, his small legs pumping furiously as he threw himself into my arms. I caught him swinging him up onto my hip, burying my face in his warm curls as he giggled loudly. He was safe. He would never know the cold, conditional love of the Harrison dynasty. He would never be subjected to their racist scrutiny, their manipulative power games, or their toxic entitlement. He would grow up in a home where love was given freely, where support was absolute, and where hard work and integrity were the only currencies that actually mattered. Donovan walked over and wrapped his arms around both of us, pulling us into a tight, secure embrace. I rested my head against his chest, feeling the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. We stood there together as the sun began to set, painting the suburban sky in brilliant shades of gold and violet. We had started with absolutely nothing but a cardboard box for a dining table, a stack of unpaid bills, and an unshakable belief in each other. We had survived poverty, systemic prejudice, and a multi-million-dollar extortion attempt by the very people who should have protected me. But in the end, we did not just survive. We conquered. We took the absolute worst they could throw at us and used it to fuel our rise to the top of the industry. We built an empire of our own design, and we ruthlessly defended our peace against those who sought to destroy it. The past was finally buried in the rubble of my parents' shattered egos, and the beautiful, brilliant future we engineered was entirely ours to enjoy. If there is one profound truth this entire ordeal has taught me, it is that blood does not automatically make someone family. For most of my life, I was conditioned to believe that I had to earn my parents' conditional love by shrinking myself to fit their prejudiced, shallow expectations. When they threw me out into the cold for choosing a brilliant, kind-hearted man over their toxic country club standards, I thought my world had ended. But the reality is, my true life was just beginning. True family is not defined by shared DNA or generational wealth. It is defined by who stands beside you when you have absolutely nothing but a cardboard box for a dining table. It is about who supports your dreams in the dark, long before the world recognizes your value or your bank account balance. Donovan and I built our success on mutual respect, relentless hard work, and unyielding loyalty. When my parents came crawling back demanding a piece of the empire, they actively tried to prevent us from building the ultimate lesson, became crystal clear. You cannot negotiate with toxicity, and you owe absolutely nothing to people who only value you conditionally. Setting impenetrable boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. Walking away from abuse is not a failure. It is the greatest, most empowering victory you can ever achieve. Have you ever had to draw a hard line to protect your peace from toxic family members? How did you find the courage to walk away and build your own chosen family? Share your experiences in the comments below. If my journey to finding true independence resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience, boundaries, and triumph. Remember, your peace is priceless, and you are entirely worthy of unconditional love.